Egg, I dreamed I was old, is one of the saddest, most moving lines, not just in A Song of Ice and Fire, but ever. If we move beyond the sadness, which is difficult, you can appreciate the literary genius behind it. It's just so efficient. 6 words, and it's one of the saddest things I've ever heard. There's been contests out there, what's the saddest thing you can write in one line, or there's a subreddit called 2-Sentence Horror. I think George just schooled them all with that, or not just, because he wrote that a while ago, but you get the point. It communicates the fear of aging and mortality that we all face. It tells of the struggles that come with the loss of mental faculties. Even though this man is still quite capable, knowledgeable, and wise, he's losing some of what makes him who he is. It also tells us, or told us when we read it, that Aemon is dying, that he's near his end. And if we dig beyond that, both the sadness and the literary genius, there's even more to those 6 words. Of course, we know who he thinks he's talking to. He's actually talking to Sam, but he thinks he's talking to Egg, his younger brother, Aegon, of Dunk and Egg fame, of course. And it was Aemon who gave him that nickname, Egg, in the first place. And we know that Aemon went to the Citadel to become a maester when he was only 9 or 10. And this was done in part because Aemon was a bookish boy, but also because Westeros had only recently fought the first Blackfyre Rebellion and still remembered the Dance of the Dragons. It was believed, in particular by the king, among others, that too many Targaryens was at least as dangerous as too few, if not more so. Now, dreams don't always make sense, but from those clues, we can gather that Aemon was dreaming of those years when he called out his brother's name, meaning before he went to the Citadel, while he was still in daily contact with Egg, when they were boys, when Civil War was just a game. Egg was his first nickname, but history remembers him as Aegon the Unlikely because his ascent to the throne as the 4th son of a 4th son was indeed very, very unlikely. But before Egg was offered the crown, it was offered to Aemon, his older brother. But not only did he refuse, the offer made him realize that his claim was a danger to his younger brothers. This despite his maester's oath, right? It didn't kick him out of the picture entirely. So in order to help protect the brother he loved so much and to help ensure the realm did not again descend into civil war, he took the Black and sailed for the Wall, never to return to the South. This focus on duty says much about the man and his quality, yet the South mostly forgot about him. But he didn't forget who he was, and neither will we. He's a character who falls into the category of too big for one episode. Thus, this episode is dedicated to those first 3.5 decades of Aemon's life, an era that contained some of the biggest events and personalities in A Song of Ice and Fire history. Aemon was born only 2 years after the Battle of the Red Grass Field, and more Blackfyre Rebellions came during this first third of his life. He lived through the Great Spring Sickness, Aerys I's rediscovery of the prophecy that dragons would be born again, the reign of his own father, King Maekar, and he spent a lot of time at court, at Dragonstone, at the Citadel in Old Town, and he was also just Uncle Maester, though. So he had a lot of roles in his life. And when he did sail for the Wall at last, he was joined by the man who had been Hand of the King for the 2 previous kings, Bloodraven. Aemon was on the Wall for 67 years, but he died at 102, which means, yes, 35 full years in the South. That's a lot. That's more than some people get in their whole life. And like Brynden Rivers, his life prior to taking the Black was every bit as interesting, if not more so, than his time on the Wall. And we've got all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast.
Can I say Aziz?
You can.
Aziz.
You did it. Hey, congratulations.
No, I laughed at the beginning of the episode, just a brief moment, because the idea started with egg.
Just the first line. Yeah, and then it goes right into sadness. Yeah, it's like, oh, wait.
I cried during your little monologue there, because I do get very moved by Maester Aemon's death. But then you put it into perspective when you say, like, he lived 35 years before he was even in the Wall. Like, he saw his family. Ned Stark lived to, like, 36.
Yeah, he only got, like, a year or two more than that total, right?
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, how tragic is it? Why is Aemon the great tragedy to me? I don't know. It really hits me hard.
It's the writing, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, and we all expect to have an end. We don't expect it to be violent. So this is something that we all just think about in a way. I mean, a lot of us listening maybe aren't anywhere near to 102 years old, but
I guess it's the most relatable, the most like, the most optimal life you could live, which is you live to 102.
Yeah.
It's still tragic, it's still sad, and that's sad to think about, you know?
Yeah, even at the end, even if you've lived a full life, it's still kind of sad. Yeah. That's it. And that gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? But thankfully, that is not our subject today. We're talking about his early years. We don't have to get to that end part. So that's nice, isn't it? So yes, hello and welcome everybody. So glad to have you back. We are back to book coverage only. This is an episode that was chosen by our patrons early in 2024. From the Topics Moot thing that we got started, and we're going to do next year as well. So if you're a patron, look out for Topics Moot emails coming early 2025 or late 2024, and we'll be finishing the season, or this year rather, with only book coverage, maybe the occasional mention of a show here and there, but pretty rare. We're book topics only, and about, I think, 7 of the topics we have left for this year are Topics Moot.
Yeah, I think if they dropped some crazy Dunkin' Egg footage, maybe we would cover it. But you know,
other than that, we are book focused only, unless something changes. So that's where we're at. Now, remember, folks, every Sunday we do live streams at 3 Eastern. This stuff right here, and it gets published as a podcast the following week. You can find that on any podcast platform. It's edited, so you get a little bit higher quality version that way. You can also catch the video still on Spotify. Spotify does hold videos these days. They've been doing that for a few years now, and it keeps on growing. So nice to have a secondary platform for video. You can always be listening to our show and flip on the video just to see what we're talking about if there's a map on screen, and then just flip it right back off if you don't want to do the bandwidth. Or maybe you'd enjoy catching our visuals all the way through, even if it's just me talking. And of course, like I said, you can get the audio anywhere podcasts are available. And if you listen on Patreon, it's ad-free. So that's nice. Get a few extra minutes in your day. I don't have to listen to those ads that you may not enjoy. Also, you can check us out on Twitch every Friday. I am live streaming Crusader Kings 3 for A Song of Ice and Fire. Highly detailed, fun mod I'm playing right now. The son of Daemon, Prince Daemon, not Daemon Blackfyre, or sorry, the daughter of Daemon. I said son, but I meant to say daughter. Her name is Miracle with a Y, and she's the daughter of Daemon and Mysaria in this alternate reality, and it's pretty sweet. So check that out, twitch.tv/History of Westeros. A lot of notes in this one from Nina. Now that we're back to book coverage, she is hitting the bricks with us quite a bit. And a lot of notes from her. We also recorded an episode of Baelor the Blessed, scripted last week, that y'all will be seeing eventually. Make sure to check out goodqueenally.tumblr.com for more notes from her. Yeah. All right. Let's get into it. You can always send questions to us at westeroshistory@gmail.com and interact with us anywhere on social media where you might find us. We're always just Westeros History. Or History of Westeros. Either way, we're always just both of those things. Yes, we are a dual-faced, right? not the same as two-faced. At the end of this episode, I'll mention some ones that relate to this one. There's quite a few. We've worked in this era before. So let's start with a trivia question. Aemon named his brother Egg. He gave him that nickname, as I said in the intro. But he also named an animal. I don't mean like he classified it like a new species, but he named a particular animal. What animal and what name? Answer at the end. Also, answer is during the episode. The trivia question will be revealed as we speak, so pay attention if you don't already know, and you'll hear it.
Can I ask you a question before we get into this?
You can.
Kind of pertains to your opening quote. When Aemon says, "Egg, I dreamed I was old," and we know that he also talks about how they all dreamed of dragons and maybe had prophetic dreams. Do you think there is actually any chance that Aemon, as a young boy, had real prophetic dreams about himself old on the wall, and actually at one point told Egg about dreaming he was old?
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that.
It's kind of beyond the scope of this a little bit, but, you know, like, because you talk more about dragon dreaming.
Well, I did talk, there is some notes later in the episode. It's going to be the first thing after our halfway point, roughly, where we do get into the dragon dream stuff. And something that's interesting about it is if you're a Targaryen and you have dreams that have dragons in them, how do you know if it's prophetic or not? You know some of your ancestors have definitely had prophetic dragon dreams. So how do you know if this is one or not? It might just be a dream. Might be, but it might be prophetic. So how do you tell that apart? That to me is fascinating, and something that, yes, maybe by Aemon having such a long life would actually be able to have more perspective on that, because he'd have had so many dreams, and if any of them had come true, well, that would change his opinion on a lot of things, or at least make him more confident in the supernatural currents that run in dreams in this world. That's a good question, yeah. So what we're going to have today, here's the titles of our different sections. We have the firsts, which is the first mentions, which in this case is plural, yes, because Aemon's first mention in Song of Ice and Fire, his first appearance in the Song of Ice and Fire, and then, pardon me, his first mention in the Hedge Knight. Then we're going to talk about his birth and naming, then his early life before the Citadel. Then we're going to talk about Dragon Dreams and a little bit about the rest of his family in that regard. Then the Citadel, his time there, which was about 10 years. Then the things that were happening around Westeros while he was at the Citadel. Some of them would have affected him very much. Some of them would have affected his family. Then the forging of his chain in the year 217. The third Blackfyre Rebellion 2 years later. The death of Aerys I and the Ascension of Maekar, which was a big deal for Aemon. Maekar was his father. Then his stint at Dragonstone for his brother Daeron the Drunkard. And then the death of Daeron, where we think Aemon went back to court. And then finally the death of Maekar, which leads to the Great Council, and then his departure for the Wall. That will be how we round it out. So let us begin with a quote. His first mention in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Ser Waymar shrugged.
You ought dress more warmly, Garrod.
Garrod glared at the lordling, the scars around his ear holes flushed red with anger where Maester Aemon had cut the ears away. We'll see how warm you can dress when the winter comes. He pulled up his hood and hunched over his garron, silent and sullen.
I don't have a whole lot to say about this. It's just neat that Aemon is one of the first characters ever mentioned. We hear about him before Ned Stark, before, well, any Stark, I think. So that's pretty cool. I like that. And immediately you see what his role is. He's some sort of doctor, healing man. You know, at this point, you don't even know what a maester is if you're reading it for the first time, but this gives you an idea of what that might mean. Like maester, like what is that, right? The first time you've read that word, like, I don't know, what is a maester? First appearance in A Song of Ice and Fire. This is a longer quote, but it's extremely important to the character of Maester Aemon because it's how George chooses to introduce him. This is our first impression of Aemon, and you know what they say about first impressions. You only get that one chance, etc., etc. Here it is, quote.
As Riker filled it for him, Bowen Marsh said,
You have a great thirst for a small man.
Oh, I think that Lord Tyrion is quite a large man, Maester Aemon said from the far end of the table. He spoke softly, yet the high officers of the Night's Watch all fell quiet, the better to hear what the Ancient had to say. I think he is a giant come among us, here at the end of the world. Tyrion answered gently.
I've been called many things, my lord, but giant is seldom one of them.
Nonetheless, Maester Aemon said, as his clouded, milk-white eyes moved to Tyrion's face, I think it is true. For once, Tyrion Lannister found himself at a loss for words. He could only bow his head politely and say,
You are too kind, Maester Aemon.
The blind man smiled. He was a tiny thing, wrinkled and hairless, shrunken beneath the weight of 100 years, so his maester's collar, with its links of many metals, hung loose about his throat. I have been called many things, my lord, he said, but kind is seldom one of them. This time, Tyrion himself led the laughter.
So you can see everyone defers to him. Even Tyrion, who is genuinely kind of snarky and ready with the jokes, but Maester Aemon, he treats with more respect. There's just something different about this man that engenders that treatment of him. You just want to respect him. You can't help yourself. He's just that kind of guy.
Do you think, is Maester Aemon really considered snarky by people?
No, I wouldn't think he's considered snarky. I'm saying Tyrion is considered snarky, and this moves him to be not snarky, is my point.
Well, it's interesting that Aemon says he's seldom called kind.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so
just-
Aemon is called. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, he's cutting people's ears off and stuff, so you know. Yeah, I wonder about that. Yeah, Maester Aemon has given tough talk to people. I'm sure he delivers it respectfully, but maybe not kindly.
It's kind of a weird
sometimes.
joke unless you're known to be a hardliner a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like if everyone there knows Aemon kind of like never holds back when he talks to you about something.
Yeah, like he's respectful, but he's not going to hold back. He'll tell you straight to your face, like "kill the boy," for example. Like
Yeah.
phrases like that. That's
It's
harsh.
not kind. It's harsh.
That's not kind, but it's loving, but it's not kind. You know what I mean? Or it's right, but it's not kind. So I think this is a big deal. The way he's introduced. Yes, we're not talking about him at this age, but this is the man he grew into. The time as a younger person. The way he lived his life led to this. The way he lived his life led to being respected, led to being a man that even someone like Tyrion, who is irreverent, who laughs in his own father's face. He tells jokes to Tywin when Tywin demands being serious, and he doesn't do it. But for Aemon, he's serious. Here's his first mention in The Hedge Knight. Quote,
It's short for Aegon. My brother Aemon named me Egg. He's off at the Citadel now, learning to be a maester.
in context, and especially at the time, because this is the Hedge Knight, right? At the time, there wasn't a Sworn Sword or a Mystery Knight. This would be an Easter egg. Talking about his brother Aemon. Egg is the Easter egg. Talking about Aemon. Yeah, anyway. So that's pretty cool. Like in the Hedge Knight, you find out, oh yeah, Aemon would have been alive back then. That's really neat. Now, there's a few other characters in the Hedge Knight that are alive in that era, like Walder Frey, but he doesn't appear till, the Mystery Knight. So a couple of old folks that lived long lives.
What was the order of us getting Aemon calling Egg and the Hedge Knight? Like how close to those reveals happen? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, like when did we find out he was the one who gave him that name?
Yeah, when did we find out that, I confirm, was it at all something people debated? Was everyone like, well, obviously Egg is Aegon the Unlikely, his brother, before that point?
I don't recall, because the Hedge Knight came out in 1998, which
it
actually
predated
predates even my time in the fandom. I got in around 2000, 2001, so.
Okay. So it predates Aemon and saying that, and regardless. So everyone who had read the Hedge Knight was like, oh, this is this character we know. Cool.
I think so, yeah. Cool. That sounds right to me, but I guess I can't completely confirm that. So yeah, those were his first mentions and first appearance. Let's talk about his birth and his name. He was born in 198 to Prince Maekar and Lady Deanna Dane. Maekar's mother was Mariah Martell, so a Dornish mother and a Dornish wife. For Maekar, none of Maekar's three brothers had a Dornish wife, though Baelor Breakspear was the only one who looked Dornish. He didn't marry a Dornish woman. So Maekar has a Dornish mother and a Dornish wife, making Aemon and Egg and the others the most Dornish of the Targaryens of this generation.
Although with a Dane mother, they're a little bit of a different style of Dornish.
You're right. That's a good point.
They could have had the silver hair still. They might, which is why Egg and none of his brothers maybe looked quite as Dornish.
Yeah, and you're right, because you would think Baelor is more Dornish because he looks more Dornish, but actually, genetically speaking, yeah, there's more, quote unquote, more blood from Dorne. It's not exactly how it works, but this is our shorthand for such things. So he was the third child of 6. He was the third son. The first 3 were all sons. There was Daeron and then Aerion. Now, we don't know what year Aerion was born. We can narrow it down a bit. He was between 4 and 7 years older than Aemon. And Daeron was 7 or 8 years older than Aemon. So it's a little narrower on him. We'll just say roughly 7 years older for Daeron and roughly 5 years older for Aerion. Now, he had an egg placed in his cradle. That tradition maintained even into this era. And now, there hadn't been a dragon born in more than 50 years or so, and there weren't any dragons as of 157. So it had been 41 years since there had been a living dragon in Westeros, but they were still placing eggs in cradles. That tradition carried on. Nothing wrong with that, but it's interesting, of course. Now, what we can guess about these eggs is that these would be recycled eggs. This egg probably had been in other cradles, at least one, because they weren't getting new eggs. There's no more dragons laying eggs. So, yeah, they just keep the egg, and when they die, the egg gets given to a new Targaryen, I guess. Now, he was named for Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. Maekar was a warrior, the most warlike of his four brothers, even though Baelor was more famous as a warrior. Baelor was, maybe, shall we say, had a more diverse personality overall. Maekar was he was a warrior through and through and had less else going on, shall we say. So it tracks that Maekar would approve of a legendary figure like Aemon the Dragon Knight, might have idolized him, because the Dragon Knight died around the time Maekar was 4, 5, 6 years old, very young. So a legendary figure with a fairly long life for a warrior. A lot of warriors don't get very old. And this is the world Maekar was growing up into. But here's the twist. Maekar didn't name Aemon, which is weird, right? And you say, oh, well, his mother did, right? No. King Daeron did it. That's very unusual. The grandfather choosing the name for the boy. I don't think we have another example of this. It's
Crusader Kings 3. It happens all the time.
Good point. Shay got me there. But in the text of A Song of Ice and Fire and the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I don't know if we have another example of a grandmother or grandfather. In this case, it's the king, so it's more than just a grandfather. But yeah, I wonder about that. We don't have any reason for it, or like I said, any other example of something like that happening. Maekar likely approved of it and may have even asked for it. He's like, yeah, I like the name Aemon. That'd be cool. But, and Maekar in general, he's very traditional, right? He's named his sons Daeron, who's the current king, right? The same name as the current king. We got Aerion, which is Targaryen-esque, you know, unlike Baelor, who's naming his kids things like Valar and Mataris, which are not standard Targaryen names. And we have Aelor and Aelora, which I think those are the sons, the twin daughter and son of his older brother, Rhaegal. Those are vaguely Targaryen, but we've never seen them before or after. Anyway, so in some ways, Maekar was the most traditional, which is ironic because he's the most Dornish, or rather his family is. And the idolization of Aemon the Dragon Knight would have been a tricky subject because of yes, he's a legendary warrior, but remember at the time there was the scandal of the possibility that he's the father of Daeron, the king, instead of his father Aegon the Unworthy. That thing, they talk about that early in A Game of Thrones. It's still around, right? But it's would have been a lot different when it was fresher. So maybe they thought it was safer to reference Aemon a little later down the line. Now, here's something really that I didn't notice till researching this episode, and I think that's super interesting that it comes out this way. So 2 years after the first Blackfyre Rebellion, right? That's when Aemon is born, okay? The Blackfyre Rebellion is 196, Aemon is born in 198. Maekar was famous for helping win the battle. Yes, Baelor got more acclaim than Maekar he was already the older one. He was already more famous as a youth, so he got the lion's share of the credit. Maekar was noted, but maybe he was in his brother's shadow a bit. Either way, it's a peculiar thing to be a young Aemon at a time when Aegon and Aemon Blackfyre were killed in battle by Bloodraven and his raven's teeth. So here you are, young Aemon, and your family has just been to war with a family that very recently where an Aemon and an Aegon were killed. This might be why he wasn't named Aemon, or rather his brother wasn't named Aemon, because it's kind of odd, right? You have Aerion and Daeron born prior to the Blackfyre Rebellion. Then after Aemon and Aegon Blackfyre died, Maekar's next two sons are Aemon and Aegon. It's like he didn't want to copy the names, but as soon as the names were freed up, he used them right away. 198, Aemon. The year 2000, Aegon. As soon as those two boys were killed, he was ready to grab those names.
You said the year 2000.
Oh, sorry, the year 200. My bad. I added a whole. I multiplied by 10. Yeah. So that's kind of telling, I think, that the second those names were available, he's like, yeah, I'm using those. No one else gets to have an Aegon or an Aemon. I'm taking them. It's also a little bit of trivia because there's been a lot of Aegon and Aemon brothers, or Aegon and Aemons who were born to the same family. The Aegon was always first until this one. The Aegon is always the older of the two. Aegon's always older than the Aemon. It was true for the Blackfyre kids. It was true for Jaehaerys and Alysanne's sons. Yes, Aemon was the famous one that went on to be Hand of the King, and was killed before he took that title. But they had an Aegon before that who only lived to be about 3 days old. So there's a lot of Aegon and Aemons out there. Aegon and Aemon Targaryen, meaning Aegon the Unworthy and Aemon the Dragon Knight. That was another Aegon and Aemon right here. So yeah. Anyway, that's kind of a neat little trivia. But between Aegon and Aemon, there was a daughter also. That's Daea. We love to say Daea. Daella. It's probably right. But ever
Not
since
like
Chloe,
paella.
we like to say Daea.
Yeah, like paella.
Like paella, that's right. She's a very delicious Targaryen. Spicy, too. So early life. This is the phase of Aemon's life when he was born up until the point where he left for the Citadel, which, again, happened pretty young. But still, good 9-10 years at court, sort of. We're not entirely clear on it because, yeah, he would have been at the Red Keep a lot, but probably at Summerhall even more. Because Maekar, again, felt overshadowed after the Blackfyre Rebellion. He took offense to the lack of acclaim given to him in proportion to how much his brother got. He wasn't given a council seat. He wasn't made hand to the king. Just other stuff like he wanted to have. The things he wanted that he didn't get. And his pride was very hurt by this, or maybe hurt isn't the right word, whatever. His pride was wounded by this. And so he decided to stay away from court more and more. And eventually he took up residence in Summerhall. Now, Summerhall's never had an established tradition for who got to live there. It just didn't exist very long. It was built and then it was destroyed without existing for enough generations for these patterns to develop. So basically, usually the Prince of Dragonstone is the heir, right? So that's the situation. So he's not the heir. Summerhall's kind of open, and no one lived there. The next heir didn't live there either. Rhaegal was ahead of him. Aerys I was ahead of the future. Aerys I was ahead of him as well. But neither of them wanted to live at Summerhall. They all wanted to live at court and or Dragonstone. So Maekar kind of just took the open spot and said, "I don't want to live at court. We've got a summer palace here far away. I'm going to live here." And he set his household up there. So when we're thinking about Aemon's youth, I'm tempted to talk about the people at court who would have influenced him, but it's possible, and I'm going to, but it's possible that these people had a very small influence on him because he spent much of his youth at Summerhall away from a lot of the other Targaryens. Either way, he would have been doing a lot of the standard things a young princeling does, training at arms, courtly manners, basic education, reading and writing other languages. They learned High Valyrian. They do that now in current time, so I assume they did it back then. And his was a junior branch of the family. Remember, Maekar was the fourth son. So, yeah, well, Aerys didn't have children, but both of Maekar's other brothers did. So there's a lot of kids ahead of his kids and ahead of himself. So again, just didn't ever seem like being in the line of, it was almost irrelevant, the line of succession to them. We're so far down the line of succession, we can ignore it entirely. Turns out that was wrong, but at the time, it seemed right. So yes, it's famously said that Aeg is the fourth son of a fourth son. Well, Aemon's the third son of a fourth son, so that's not that much higher, right? And King Daeron II did have a big family. It was one the realm was confident in. Baelor Breakspear was expected to follow him eventually. He was hand to the king already at this point. Had 2 sons of his own. It looked good. One of the reasons people liked and respected Baelor was he was a war hero. He was charismatic. He was a good guy. I mean, we see him in the Hedge Knight. Everybody was looking forward to his reign. Obviously, it didn't happen. But yeah, he was also a civil war hero. And for anyone who lived through the Blackfyre Rebellion, yes, rebellion, singular at this point still, this was nothing to take lightly, especially at the Red Keep. I mean, that's who their big enemy was, right? The culture around the Red Keep and Summerhall too, I would assume, would be very anti-Blackfyre, right? Like, this is the people that rose up and nearly stole their kingdom, killed lots of people they loved. They wouldn't have the kind of view that we as listeners and readers and fans of the story would have. We see both sides of the Blackfyre Rebellions. I think a lot of us have a choice. Like, I think a lot of people side with the Loyalists because they're the ones who they didn't deserve to be overthrown. But Daemon Blackfyre is an interesting character. He wasn't completely without his reasons. So we can entertain the story as people who aren't involved directly in it. We're fans. We didn't live through it. But these characters in their world did live through it, and the Blackfyres would be persona non grata. They'd be their biggest enemies, the biggest threat out there. They didn't know about the others, right? They didn't know about any of that stuff. So the Blackfyres were literally enemy number one, and 5 of Daemon Blackfyre's sons were still alive. Bittersteel was still alive. He had the sword. And though they had fled overseas, everybody knew they were still Blackfyre supporters, Blackfyre loyalists everywhere. Many of them just bent the knee. Did their loyalties actually change because they lost, or just because they were saving their necks to bend by, submitting? Most likely, maybe a little of both. But definitely everyone knew if the Black Dragon returned, many would rise up for him, whichever Black Dragon it happened to be. And so this permeates their culture. The Targaryen culture at the time is a distaste for Blackfyres, or what they would call rebels. And here we go, a fun example. We get Egg weighing in on exactly this. Quote,
Egg made a face. Rebel lords. Dunk frowned down at him.
What do you mean?
They were for the Black Dragon. Well, Lord Shawnee was, and Lord Costain's father. Aemon and I used to fight the battle on Maester Meliquin's green table with painted soldiers and little banners. Costain's arms quarter a silver chalice on black with a black rose on gold. That banner was on the left of Daemon's host. Shawnee was with Bittersteel on the right and almost died of his wounds.
That's pretty cool that he recognizes it from playing these games. He's like, oh, I recognize that sigil. That's a rebel lord. Board gaming, wargaming. It gives a clue from their childhood. Royal, noble children replaying battles, playing soldiers, boys playing with army men. It's a tale as old as time. It just, as royal children, they play the role of commanders rather than the role of soldiers, right? Or both, really. But this is framed as a very personal thing, too. It isn't just a civil war from hundreds of years ago that their very distant ancestors fought in. This is something that happened a few years ago, that the descendants of these people they're talking about are still out there, still ruling these castles. There's a Costain right now whose arms are a silver chalice on black with black rose and gold. He's living, down there in the Reach, doing his thing, and perhaps ready to rise up for the Black Dragon again. Same thing with Lord Shawnee. Though they, to be fair, they probably also did replay battles from 100 years ago also. But this one, it was a little more prominent. So Aemon went to the Citadel again in the year 207 or 208. So these board games would have been before that, right? That brief time before he went to the Citadel. So we're looking at Aemon being like 8 years old, playing with his brother who was 6. That's pretty young to be playing war games, but they raise them quick when they're royals, right?
I think they're both pretty smart.
Yeah, they're both smart. Yeah,
precocious, smart. Yeah,
especially Aemon. I mean, Aegon's very smart too, but Aemon would have particularly been like, this would have been his wheelhouse. Maybe not wargaming, but history, which this is part of. And that's a weird part of it too. You're playing a board game where a key moment is two boys named Aegon and Aemon getting killed. It's like, my little pet theory is that Aemon came up with the nickname Egg to differentiate him from that Aegon. Like, from a little boy's perspective, that's a whole different name, even though it's basically the same name. It's just a shortening of Aegon. I don't know. So yeah, it is a bit odd to consider that. Not only is it weird to think about two boys with the exact same names having been killed on this other side of the Civil War. That could have been them instead if it gone differently and continued, or if the war had picked up sooner. The guy who did that, Brynden Rivers, would be a constant presence around the Red Keep, a kinslayer who killed two boys with their names. He's the Hand of the King, just all around, just there, like, would they be intimidated by him or not? I mean, Egg later doesn't seem to be intimidated by him later. He's like, but he also doesn't seem to like him necessarily. Maybe he doesn't dislike him, but they're not friendly, So I don't know if that's how it was when they were younger, but I'm guessing that they didn't know him super well. Maekar didn't really like Bloodraven until he became king. He kept him on as Hand of the King, but he was a little jealous of him. He thought that he should have been Hand of the King for Aerys rather than Bloodraven. So it's possible some of Egg's dislike for Bloodraven was given to him by his father, and it would be helped by the fact that Bloodraven's an intimidating, kind of different-looking guy. Easier to dislike. And then some of that may have been passed on to Aemon as well.
I mean, picture being a little kid. Think about Bloodraven's description.
Yeah.
You see that man, you're not creeped out. I can't imagine not being creeped out as a child.
I agree. It's hard to not be creeped out by that, especially with that reputation. Like, this guy's a kinslayer, and a lot of people would talk badly about him just to bring down his reputation. Like, negativity about Bloodraven would be not uncommon. To his face, it would be, but he got whispered about a lot. And we assume this is commoners and lesser people, but why not within his own family too? Why not Aegon and Aemon and other nieces and nephews who would have been intimidated by him and maybe seen him as strange or even evil?
I kind of picture his older brothers using him as a figure to prank and torture Egg, like, Aegon being, you better do this or I'll send Bloodraven after you, whatever.
It's a good call. I like that. He would be a name to refer to inspire fear in somebody. Yeah, it's like, it's not the devil, it's not the boogeyman, it's Bloodraven. So this Maester that's mentioned in that quote, Maester Meliquin's Green Table, they replayed this battle. Maester Meliquin was the Maester at Summerhall during Daeron II and Aerys I reigns. Remember, Aerys I follows Daeron II on the throne. So this Maester Meliquin was a tutor to Aemon, probably to his brothers and sisters as well. Certainly his brothers, probably his sisters as well. And so he may have had a particular influence on Aemon. If you're a kid that grows up to be a Maester, I think it's definitely worth looking at the Maesters you were around as a kid as a possible influence. He may have really liked this Maester Meliquin and thought this guy was a good man and wanted to emulate him, which would have been a problem for King Maekar, Prince, and then eventually King Maekar, who didn't like his sons to be bookish. He wanted his sons to be warriors. He wanted them to be royals. He didn't like Egg traipsing around the country with a hedge knight, though he liked the argument Dunk gave him more than he liked his own pride. He thought it was, he was convinced. The merit argument was convincing, so you give Maekar credit for that. But this is well before that. This is when his sons were young. When he was younger, he probably would have been more stubborn, less wise, less worldly, more set on his sons being warriors. Especially because he was competitive with his brothers. He was overshadowed by his brothers, really mostly just Baelor. And Baelor's sons were warriors and looked to be well equipped in that regard as well. So we're not saying that he forced Aemon to be a warrior. Like, when I say that, I think of the worst example of all, which is Sam being forced into this by Randall. The most horrible example of making someone into something they're not. Like the worst or best example of square peg round hole. Just, you cannot make Sam into a warrior. I don't think you could make young Aemon into one either. And yeah, I don't think Maekar was doing things like torturing him and isolating him and doing all the horrible things that Randall did to Sam. But I think he probably felt his father's disappointment. He was probably not the kind of man that would hide that disappointment for the sake of his son. No, this guy was outspoken, proud, and I think it probably hurt Aemon a little bit, but probably not overly so. Aemon still grew into a very competent and confident and disciplined man.
He probably appreciated the war games they were playing, the board game thing, like in terms of like them being like, let's do a hobby and activity that Dad'll approve of.
And they're literally replaying a war he was a hero in. Yeah, like this is like, and here's Dad doing this part, and they'd be like, yeah, like here's our father. Like, I want to play our father. No, I want to play our father. Yeah, he'd like that. So, and despite this shadow of the recent civil war and worries of more to come, Daeron II's court was known for being highly cultured, diverse, and a good environment for learning, which this could be a shame if Maekar kept Aemon away from this. It's one of the things that the Blackfyre supporters didn't like. There were too many maesters and Dornish people and poets and musicians and people who weren't warriors. Just you name it. Name a profession that isn't warrior, and the Blackfyres didn't like those people being around the king. Maekar may not have liked that as much either, but not to the extent that the Blackfyres didn't. He wasn't quite so hardline, I don't think. So, again, this is where we remind ourselves. This is a court where there's lots of Dornish people and maesters. Aemon's, again, had a Dornish mother, a Dornish grandmother, and became a maester. That sounds like the perfect environment for him. So I hope he got to spend a lot of time there and around those kind of people, but I worry that his father kept him isolated at Summerhall, where he maybe yearned for that environment, knew it was so close, and he just didn't quite have access to it. Given that Aemon and his siblings were the most Dornish, though, I wonder if the queen took any special interest in these grandchildren of hers. Maybe she was like, hey, son Maekar, bring your kids to court more often. And he would probably obey that. You know, she herself was a Martell, right? So, and she had 4 children. Her first 3 sons, again, this is Queen Mariah we're talking about. Her first 3 sons married a Stormlander, a Crownlander, and a Valeman. I'm sorry, Vale woman, rather. Stormlander, a Crownlander, and a Vale woman. But as we said before, Maekar married Deanna Dane, right?
I think Mina makes a great point here when she says she thinks it's even possible that Queen Mariah arranged the marriage herself, or at least supported it or enabled it to happen. Because if you think about Deanna being a countrywoman to her, it's possible that Maekar and Deanna met because Deanna came to court at Mariah's invitation to be a lady in waiting, right? Or maybe had a relative at court. Regardless, the fact that there was a Dornish presence at court means they're more likely to be more Dornish women at court, and that's how Maekar ended up with his bride, potentially.
That's a fantastic example, and I want to give a similar example from a more modern time, which was Ashara Dane was at court as a lady-in-waiting to Elia Martell, and that led to her meeting all sorts of people, which, you know, that went tragic, but it didn't have to. But it's a similar kind of situation here of a Dane at court, perhaps because she's part of the ladies-in-waiting or just part of Deanna's or Mariah's entourage, etc. Great fit. Like, think how big Marjorie's entourage was. She had so many noble girls hanging out with her, and yeah, she was like the real it girl at court. But it's not that weird. It wasn't so unusual. What was unusual about it was just not that she had an entourage. It was that it was particularly large, like, because Marjorie was particularly popular and particularly charismatic.
It has a lot of family.
Has a huge family too. Like all these factors. Yeah, just multiple reasons why Marjorie's was larger than would be normal. So beyond that, we should be thinking about the particulars of these marriages, because when we detailed these marriages the first time, back when we did our episode on Daeron II, which seems like a lifetime ago, that episode still holds up though. His son's marriages, and here of his wife, they work together on it quite possibly. They tell quite a story. These marriages aren't random people they married. These were very politically particular marriages. Yes, having one of them be Dornish was important and particular because, yes, they want to pull support away from the Dornish loyalists. They want to have Dorne on their side and not give Dorne a reason to fall back into independence and cause civil war again. And that in turn makes us consider the choices made for Daeron and Mariah's grandchildren as well. If they were particular about who their sons married, they would probably be particular about who their sons' children married. They're still ruling after all. So they're still making political decisions when they choose brides and husbands for their princes and princesses. And in the shadow of civil war, you can understand why these choices are fraught with factors that are relevant to preventing war. So they may have been thinking, who is Aemon going to marry? They may have had ideas like, okay, from a very early age, they start planning these things ahead. It's a lot like arranged marriages, and these plans often begin very early on, right? Like, how many times have we seen a Targaryen son and daughter born near each other, and you're like, well, those two will probably marry each other because they're a similar age. Now, in this era of post-draconic authority, they were less about the incest. In some ways, they were a lot less about the incest, but it definitely wasn't gone. There was still the occasional brother-sister marriage and a few others, but there was a lot more consideration to more typical royal marriages where you marry one of the most powerful non-royal houses to shore up your royal power. The prior Targaryens were so powerful, they didn't need to do that. They had dragons. They were so powerful without marrying into the other houses. So in a sense, it was another form of power to not need to make these marriages. But that became less true without dragons for pretty obvious reasons. So, yeah, maybe they had ideas for who Aemon would marry, but I think these ideas died quickly. There's clues that they were not going to have Aemon marry in the family or even at all, because King Daeron thought there were too many Targaryens. He's like, there's too many of y'all. This is what led to the dance. Okay, yeah, we don't have dragons this time, but clearly dragons aren't the only thing that causes these wars, or else why did the Blackfyre Rebellion just happen? So they know the risk is there. It's not all about dragons. Daeron was intent on making sure that past was not repeated. Don't make the mistakes of the past. Don't be King Viserys the First. Don't just let these things be swept under the carpet until they explode. Cut these problems off at the head. Take care of them in advance. Make moves. Be aggressive. Take the initiative. So Aemon going to the Citadel was a really good fit for many reasons. A, it's this thing. It keeps the Targaryen family from growing too large. Obviously, making him a maester means he won't make more Targaryens, which is always a risk for any male or female Targaryen, especially the males, because of the way, family lines pass, because of the paternalism of family names. Still, Targaryen blood is Targaryen blood, and that can cause problems. So this was there's a bit of a precedent here, too. He wasn't the first Targaryen sent to the Citadel. That would have maybe been looked down on or frowned on, but it had already been done. Archmaester Vaegon was the son of Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Archmaester, not maester. It was said at the time to Jaehaerys, like, your son would never be a maester. And Jaehaerys is like, really? And he's like, can you picture that guy serving others, like, treating wounds and delivering children? Like, he hates people. Like, Jaehaerys is like, okay, good point. Yeah, he's not going to serve anyone. But an Archmaester doesn't serve people. He just studies and writes books and leads knowledge. The only other people he'd ever deal with are other academics like himself. And
he would be served. The Archmaesters are served by all the lower maesters in the Citadel.
Yeah.
We've seen it. Like, they're the top of the pile, right?
Yeah, you're right. So this was a change from that, because he is more a servant than an Archmaester is. Because it's like in terms of cultural viewpoints, this is definitely a life of service.
Well,
Archmaester is not necessarily a life of service maester. A lot of people see it that way.
Didn't jump right to Archmaester.
No, you're right.
Like, he had to put in his... I'm sure he was promoted sooner than he would have otherwise.
But he was never sent to a castle to serve. That's what I mean. Yeah.
He always served at the Citadel. He wasn't deployed.
Yeah, he would have served other maesters, as an assistant, as a...
But he was serving other scholars and academics, and people who were kind of of the same mind.
He was probably still difficult, but that would be the one place he could probably serve and not be. Aemon, though, completely different personality. He didn't have that level of pride. He didn't have that ego. He had a sense of duty that seemed to transcend his Targaryen identity. And I think a lot of that came from the environment he grew up in. King Daeron himself had that value system. He put the realm first. And I think that trickled down to the rest of the family and maybe to some of the other higher lords and ladies as well. But definitely to Aemon, unless he was just born that way, which is possible. But it feels like there's got to be some nature and some nurture. And the nurture, I think, comes from the top. Not just Daeron, though, but his father and other things like that. So yeah, he didn't have the makings of a warrior. He was never going to be a Kingsguard, because that's another choice, right? Like there haven't been a lot of Targaryen Kingsguard, but that thing happened recently too. We had Aemon the Dragon Knight, the first Targaryen Kingsguard, and that was a smashing success. The guy's one of the most legendary warriors of all time, and he had the same name, but obviously he was not a warrior. So the Citadel's the next best choice. If you're going to be someone who serves and doesn't have children to carry on the family name, and you can't be a Kingsguard, maybe this is the next best thing. I don't think Maekar was happy with it. In fact, we know Maekar wasn't happy about it. But what's he going to do? It's the king's dictate. The king said so. Maekar has to, Maekar's a man of duty. He can't both be a man of duty and go against the king's command. And this is all supported, the idea that Maekar and Daeron and not Maekar, the idea that Daeron had picked Aemon for the Citadel pretty early in life is not only supported by the fact that he went to the Citadel early in life, but the fact that he may not have been pegged to marry one of his sisters early on is communicated to us by Egg's suggestion that he was originally meant to be betrothed to Daella. So you would think that Daella would marry Aemon, because she's born 1 year after him. But no, she was going to marry Egg, who was 1 year after her. And then there was Rhae, who came after Egg. You would think that Rhae would marry Egg, because he was the last son, and then Daella would marry Aemon. But no, there's no mention that Daella was ever betrothed to Aemon. It looks like Daella was very early on betrothed to Egg. So it seems like they figured out Aemon's future pretty early on, which I assume he told them by his behavior. Like, this kid is a maester.
I'm still brought now to just the idea of like what could kids have had dreams of, like if he just dreamt early on of times of him as a maester and he said something and they took him seriously, like there's your excuse for why they had his track for life.
Rhaegar said, "It seems I must be a warrior." Maybe Aemon was like, "It seems I must be a maester."
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of what I'm saying. It's like he might have influenced things more than we think, or known his track, known his role in life.
Yeah, right. That's a good theory. So on the downside, or sort of this is a bit of a bit of bad. I mean, Egg was badly bullied by Aerion. Was Aemon also badly bullied by Aerion? I don't know. Seems not unlikely. I mean, Euron bullied a lot of his brothers, and that's just kind of how it goes. I don't know how Aemon may not have responded in a way that kept Aerion coming back. Egg would fight back and lose because, Aerion's bigger. So Aerion would get the sort of torment he wanted out of the kid he was tormenting. But if Aemon was just not suffering the way Aerion got pleasure out of, he might have gotten bored with him. Either way, going to the Citadel at a young age took him out of his brother's clutches if he was in them. So that was like a bullet dodged there. He might have felt bad. He's like, oh, now Aerion's going to just pick on Egg only.
Yeah, that's
he
what
would
I
have spread it out a little bit.
Honestly, is how much Aemon was like broken up about leaving his little brother and even maybe little sisters too. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, let's not forget about them.
Don't forget about them. Like I think if Aemon is aware of that, he's racked with guilt, but knows it's best for him to leave. And yeah, I think that's a common childhood, like real world dynamic in abusive households is an older kid gets out, and then they feel guilty, and sometimes their family is more upset with them than the abuser because they feel abandoned. It's
a form of survivor's guilt, basically. Yeah, like it's a surviving, but it's you escape the horrible environment that your loved ones must remain in. On the other hand, there would have been a lot of positive influences. I mean, yeah, Aerion's a bad seed, but the rest of the family were maybe decent. Certainly if they got to spend more time at court like I hoped. Baelor Breakspear would have been a great influence on them, most likely. If they were not turned off by their father disliking him or feeling, his pride being touched all the time. Prince Aerys as well, who was later King Aerys I, is an interesting consideration for an influence too. I mean, he's also very bookish and had no children of his own. He and Aemon would have had things in common, but Aemon might have been too young to bond with him at this age. But Aemon is later going to return to court as an adult when Aerys has ascended from prince to king. So this may come full circle, and their ages may line up better for things like conversations and scholarly pursuits together. So this is an interesting possibility for a connection here that we'll keep in mind for later, because I doubt it was much of a thing when Aemon was so young.
Probably not, although it's sweet to imagine Aerys like giving him a birthday gift of a book or some text. I don't know. Like it's nice to imagine that they might have had some connection that was meaningful to Aemon more so than to Aerys or something.
I tend to think that I like what you think, like a little headcanon on the positive side that yes, he took note of his nephew's of the common ground he had with us. He's like, I was like you, and I was like, I see a little myself in you. If I had a son, I'd want him to be like you, that kind of thing. It's also possible he was just so bookish that he didn't notice other bookish people. He was so buried in his books, he doesn't even recognize a kindred spirit in his own family. Who knows? Either way, super interesting potential, especially given Aerys is the one to rediscover the prophecy later. So if Aemon and him had conversations about that, wow, that could be pretty deep. Now, Prince Rhaegal, who is his youngest nephew or his youngest uncle, the order is Baelor, Aerys, Rhaegal, Maekar. And Rhaegal may have been mad. He may have been mad in the sense that he went madder over time, like a lot of the Targaryens seem to have gone. Like they don't seem born mad very often, but several of them go mad over time. Now, Prince Rhaegal's wife was Alyce Arryn, so who knows? You never know who is going to form a connection. Maybe Alyce and Aemon were friends for some reason. Probably not, but, I want to be thorough with who the other court figures were at the time. Shiera Seastar would have been around. That's a big question mark. Quite likely would have nothing to do with Aemon at all. She's an adult with suitors chasing her constantly. What kind of connection could they possibly have, given his youth? I don't know. Maybe his interest in books and would lead into the supernatural, and she was interested in that. Maybe some of her interests inspired him.
You might just be a young boy, like, wow,
It's like, damn,
Cher's
that is-
beautiful.
Yeah.
That's what a woman is. I don't, you never know, right?
Absolutely, that's possible.
He could have been creeped out by her and kept a wide berth. He could have been like, man, what a woman.
Yeah. Some of the things she does could have inspired some of the things that he studied later. It's like, is this a real thing? Like, people talked about this? That's the thing I have coming. When Aemon goes to the Citadel, what I would love to talk about is the things that he saw in his life and whether those things inspired some of his studies. Like the idea that Shiera Seastar was preserving her youth with blood. He could look for books on that. Be like, is that real? Is that a thing? You know? He could, and of course, Dragon Dreams, he could research that, but I'm getting ahead of us. I'm getting ahead of our topics here. Let's stay here, and we'll get to that eventually, pretty soon, actually. Also, Baelor's sons. We mentioned Baelor, but there's also his sons, Valar and Mataris. We don't know a lot about Valar and Mataris, but given Baelor was such a good guy, and I don't know, it seems like they were probably pretty cool, but I don't know for sure. And maybe they were good with Aemon.
The name Valar is definitely meant to give us a certain connotation, I think, as readers.
That's true.
Like that, like you can't not think of Valor.
Yeah.
Like, you think it's a good association, in my opinion, right?
Yes, it is. It's associations with lots of things. It's association with the language of, Valar.
Yeah.
Valar Morghulis, Valar Dohaeris, all these things, which is kind of a generic, like those are just all men must, but also it feels a little Lord of the Ringsy. George is such a fan of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's writings, and the Valar are the Norse gods, the equivalent of the Norse pantheon in the Lord of the Rings world. They're 13 gods or whatever. So godlike beings, and the Maiar are one step below. So it's like the Valar and the Mataris instead of the Valar and the Maiar. George, you love your Lord of the Rings. You sneak that in there.
I think Mataris is an interesting name just because like the only real similarity we have is Mantaris.
Yes.
That's
And
really
it's Aerys, like Aerys Oakheart, not Aerys.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and
it's
then
Aerys.
Matt. I don't know. That's just Matt. Like Matt.
It's pretty unusual name. There's a few, like you mentioned Aelor and Aelora. There's a few names in these few generations that are not that common.
Yeah, George made a point to take the names in a different direction in this generation, which is, I think, very clever and very like human. That they would evolve, and it has elements of Targaryen heritage, but other things thrown in that make it distinctly different. So Kiera of Tyrosh, speaking of someone who's not Westerosi, an in-law, the wife of Prince Valar, who will later remarry Aemon's brother Daeron.
Crazy.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
One of the weirdest things to me. Like, I guess she's pretty significant politically, but it doesn't even seem like that. It still is kind of wild to me that Kiera of Tyrosh is married to two Targaryen princelings. Yeah,
it just goes to show how important their Tyroshi alliance was, given that Tyroshi were so important to supporting the Blackfyre. So they were trying to cut into that support by having. So that's what he's like. We're keeping that marriage. We need it. It's so politically important that we'll send a second prince to make this happen. So there's a chance that Kiera and Aemon had some dealings together later in life because they're going to live together at Dragonstone. And this could be where he learned some more things about the East. I think he'd be curious about her. There's things he could learn from her. And Aemon's a guy that pursues learning. So I imagine they had conversations, although these would happen later in his life, more like in his 30s than in his earliest years. We also have Aelinor Penrose, the wife of Aerys. Aerys ignored her. He didn't have kids with her. I don't know that Aelinor and Aemon would have much to talk about either, but she was there. It's potentially an influence. And Nina adds Princess Elena, who was Aegon III's youngest daughter, who lived a very long time. She may have lived to be past 70. So Aemon would have grown up knowing her. She would have been a figure of respect, someone that's a ties to the past, that would remember the generation and the era that they have just left. She wouldn't remember dragons. They would have died out when she was about 3, but she would have been around a lot of people who did, like Alan Velaryon. That's her father, her father and Alan Velaryon, meaning Aegon III, who was the Dragonbane. And he would have known, or she would have known Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight and a lot of legends from their recent past. So she was very much a key to the past, a connection to the past, a shared history of a lot of House Targaryen. And that, again, something that Aemon might have been very drawn to because of his interest in history and such things. And of course, his mother. Obviously, that's a big influence on any person, even if they're not present. If your mother's there, she's got a big influence on you. If your mother's not there, that's very influential as well, because the lack of a mother is a big deal. Now, unfortunately, we do not know much about Deanna Dane at all. All we know is that she died before 209. It could have been right before 209. It could have been a lot before 209, but not too far before 209, because she had at least to have lived long enough to have her 6th child, which there's no indication she died in childbirth. But yeah, Rey, the youngest of the 6 of Maekar's children with Deanna, well, she certainly lived to deliver Rey, and then which was a few years after Egg's birth. So yeah, we just don't know. But certainly her death would have affected him. I guess more so than a lot of his brothers and sisters, because he would have been old enough to remember it more so than maybe Egg and Rey would have. But less able to deal with it maybe as his older brothers would, Aerion and Daeron, who would have been a little more mature when it happened, but still would have been hit them all pretty hard, I think. How not, right? Safe assumption, even though there's a chance it's not. Now, when he was sent to the Citadel, we don't know what he thought of it. Maybe it was a relief. Maybe it was he felt guilty for getting out of an environment that he was leaving his brother in that wouldn't have been healthy for him. Maybe he was thrilled. He's like, yay, I get to go look at all these books and have a life of academics. He might have been, perhaps more likely it was mixed feelings. There was some good, there was some bad, some nervousness, some fear, some jealousy, some guilt, all these things.
I wonder if Aemon at the time had fantasies about I will go to the Citadel and become a maester, and then I'll go serve my brother and we'll live together. He was like, I'll get deployed into my family household and be reunited with my family.
Yeah, he might have been pretty optimistic about that. That's a good call. Now, the closest thing we have here to a parallel is when Sam is worried what his father will think of him. A Tarly wearing a maester's chain. Oh, the horror. But here's what Maester Aemon says to him in response, quote,
"My own father raised the same objections when I chose a life of service," the old man said. "It was his father who sent me to the Citadel. King Daeron had sired 4 sons, and 3 had sons of their own. Too many dragons are as dangerous as too few, I heard his grace tell my lord father the day they sent me off." Aemon raised a spotted hand to the chain of many metals that dangled loose about his thin neck. "The chain is heavy, Sam, but my grandsire had the right of it."
Interesting to consider how he says, I chose a life of service, even while he says that his own grandfather sent him to the Citadel. What I think they're implying is if he had just, the power that a young person has in a scenario like this is no one can force them to study. No one can force them to do well. He could have just flunked out. He could have just done poorly, either on purpose or because he actually wasn't good enough, which that's clearly not the case. He could have done poorly on purpose, so we'll say. That's the real possibility here. He could have chosen not to finally forge his chain. He could say, no, I'm not going to wear the chain. I've studied here. He could be like Oberyn Martell. Oberyn Martell studied at the Citadel, but he didn't become a maester.
He could have been like Vagon and become an archmaester and been less of service and more of being served, as we said. So
when he says, I chose a life of service, yeah, there was some being pushed into it, but ultimately it was his choice to go this last step and actually make it a life of service and not, as Ashea says, an archmaester or just a learned man with the last name Targaryen. He could have gone that route and still been Prince Aemon and done other things, right? Now, the chain is heavy is what he says there. That's, of course, a metaphor for the burden of duty. A big thing. It's a recurring theme, especially amongst Night's Watch characters. But to him, better that than risking a civil war. And that's a lesson that he got from King Daeron. This is the duty of their house. They are the stewards of the realm. House Targaryen is. A stewardship that they mismanaged in the Dance of the Dragons. That they arguably mismanaged before the Blackfyre Rebellions as well. Daeron, again, as I'm repeating myself, but it's a really important point. He did not want that to happen again. He was determined to learn from the past, and I think he got a lot of buy-in from the more enlightened members of his family in that. And Aemon would be one of them, a younger one to be sure, but a believer in this concept, a believer in education leading to peace or supporting peace and duty and the fundamentals of nobility and upholding the vassal system honorably. Treat your vassals well and the realm does well. Things like that. So he's too intellectually honest to disagree with the truth of all this. He's like, yeah, I don't want it to be true. I don't want these things to be true, because the fact of the matter is that I have to do this duty because these things are true. I am the third son of a fourth son. There are too many dragons. That conclusion to him is inescapable. A different man, a different woman might not accept that conclusion, but he's just too intellectual. He's too reasonable to deny the truth of that. It's too plain and simple to him to frame it any other way. He has to accept it. He's too logical. A chaotic mind, an Aerys Targaryen could be like, nah, no. He could frame himself and be like, no, what's important is what's important to me. And he can argue that this is what helps the family. But when you get down to the truth, the rationality of it all, no. Too many dragons is dangerous. Too few is dangerous too, but too many dragons can lead to civil war, and that is the ultimate responsibility of a Targaryen, is to avoid that outcome. So he did his duty to the realm, and that set an example that Aemon and others would double down on later in life. When Aemon was faced with a similar situation with his brother becoming king, he took the black to make sure that went smoothly, even though it might not have been necessary. It's not the kind of thing you risk. If he can decrease the chance of civil war by a few percentage points by having a life of service on the wall, that's worth it. That's the Qhorin Halfhand attitude. His life is coin to spend on the realm's goodness. Aemon sees it the same way, even though he was born a Targaryen. And it's a lot harder as a Targaryen to put yourself in that spot, to be a servant of the realm. It's a little easier when you're a Qhorin Halfhand and you're born smaller culturally, and you don't have the options. You don't have a potential life of drinking wine and reading books and just having a good time. That was never an option for Qhorin. So yes, it's hard to be the man he was, but for someone like Aemon, there's a certain ease that you're giving up that that these others don't have as an option. So I think that's amazing. Nina adds another point here. It's too bad Sam and Aemon never got the chance to talk more about these respective fathers, about their respective experiences. They had a lot in common. Yeah, Maekar wasn't nearly as awful and abusive, it doesn't seem like. He was probably pretty harsh. He was probably pretty... there's a point probably where Maekar realized, okay, my son's never going to be a warrior. But before he had that conclusion, he probably pushed him pretty hard. So there may have been a lot of difficulty before Maekar finally said, okay, yeah, Citadel. Fine. I give up. And that point only may have come when the king ordered it. So he may not have reached that point on his own. He was forced into it. Routines are an interesting thing, aren't they? If you get into a routine, it can be really easy to keep a routine. It can be easy to keep it going the longer you keep it going, almost the more easy it is to keep going. It's like a car that's going really fast. If it's going downhill, you barely have to touch the gas to keep it going at that speed. I kind of think of habits that way sometimes. If you get into a habit, especially if it's a good habit and you can see the benefits, it's easier to keep it going. And for me, this habit of drinking Magic Mind has really grown, because the longer I've done it, the longer, and Ashea too, the longer we've been drinking Magic Mind, the more it becomes a habit, the more a part of a daily process it is, the more easy it is to remember, and the more I value it, because I'm more and more aware, little by little, not even day by day, because yes, this is a long-term process. You're not going to just instantly, there's no drink out there that you drink it and immediately you're smarter. Come on, that doesn't exist. That, at least not yet. Maybe technology will invent such things one day, but until then, we have to use the best that we have. And Magic Mind mental performance shots, I think, is that. Every day, drink it every day. Get a little bit smarter. Your memory, your concentration improves. This is not a woo claim. If you've been listening to the show for a while, I've gone through the science here. They have systematic analysis on some of the ingredients. Others have been tested thoroughly. It depends. But the bottom line is some of them are very thoroughly tested. The claims are very thoroughly sourced, as thorough as they ever can be. And that's the bottom line. Magic Mind will help you with memory and concentration. Most people. VIP How 20 is our code. If you go to magicmind.com/VIP How 20, you get 20% off for one-time purchases and subscriptions. And you can start forming your own habit every day. Little Magic Mind, one shot, get that boost. And over time, that little boost will become a bigger boost. And you'll just be a little bit smarter. I love it. Also, I want to remind you all, hang out with me on Fridays over at twitch.tv/History of Westeros. We have so much fun deciding what to do with our characters, role-playing, and living in the world of Westeros with this really excellent, well-made mod that I'm just so grateful to the developers for creating. A couple of questions here. Arya Saxena says, Jaehaerys might have chosen Viserys the first name after his dead brother. Oh, okay, yeah, his dead...
Bringing up like a grandfather naming a grandson, but maybe that was an example or at least an influence.
That's a good call. I like that. Yeah, I don't think I'd thought about that one. I like that. Dornish Dame. Here's another... Now, why are you doing this to us, Dornish Dame? You dropping another sad quote on us here? He says, will I talk with Egg again? Find Daeron whole and happy? Hear my sisters singing to their children? Aerion is the only one he doesn't think of. Suggesting either he was bullied or knew Aegon was. That's a very good point. So when we're thinking about how Aerion treated Aemon, this is evidence that he doesn't actually want to encounter Aerion again in the afterlife. He's like, yeah, there's always one. Like, I like my other two brothers. So yeah, it's either on behalf of Egg or on behalf of both of them. Like, I think probably both of them. I doubt Aerion only picked on Egg. Like, he probably picked on them both. Yeah, maybe more on Egg than on Aemon, but probably both. So yeah, that's a good catch, Dornish Dame. Thanks for that. Dornish Dame always with great catches here in our live streams. All right, let's have an interlude before the Citadel where we talk about dragons. I know that's a lot of what a lot of y'all are most looking forward to today. So let's do it. And after we move past the dragons, this topic will be merged into the rest of the episode. So it will we'll have a little synergy with dragons and Citadel and Aemon and all that. Let's start with this quote.
Egg lowered his voice. Someday the dragons will return. My brother Daeron's dreamed of it, and King Aerys read it in a prophecy. Maybe it will be my egg that hatches. That would be splendid.
Would it?
Dunk had his doubts. Not Egg. Aemon and I used to pretend that our eggs would be the ones to hatch. If they did, we could fly through the sky on Dragonback like the first Aegon and his sisters.
Aemon and Aegon playing with their eggs, just good little dragon princes, born a bit too late to have them hatch, rather. Yep. So cute, right? Was this normal for Targaryen children of this era, meaning dreaming of their eggs hatching? And I don't mean like dreaming, like having actual dreams. I mean daydreaming, like pretending, like playing like little boys and girls would. I think yes. My guess would be yes. Targaryen children born after the dragon extinction would still play with eggs and imagine them hatching. Like real world boys and girls imagine eggs that never hatch or never would have hatched. That's the kind of imaginations that kids have. So put a little reality in it, and that just gives them all the more fodder for playing. And of course, these eggs are so cool looking. Yeah.
Can a person break open a dragon egg?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because, like, otherwise I would think one Targaryen kid over the years would have, like, broken their dragon egg.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe, I mean, I think that they're apparently pretty tough and strong. Obviously, the ones that fossilized, extremely more so, but it's a good question.
Can I tell you a story about me playing with toys as a kid?
Okay.
I was told my mom had a C-section when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I thought that's how babies happen, that you had to cut the stomach open.
Oh.
So I had a Barbie that was a pregnant Barbie doll. So I got a knife and I tried to cut her stomach open. And so anyways, I could see a child being like, well, the dragon comes out of this egg. If we just break this egg open, the dragon will come out. I could see kids trying to break their eggs.
That's what Aerion would do.
Yeah, that's what Aerion would do. He broke his egg. Maybe.
I mean, Joffrey tried to cut the puppies out of a dog.
Yeah, right? Like, I don't know.
Aerion's Joffrey-like.
That's a little bit different than that. But yeah. Don't compare me to
extreme.
Joffrey, please.
No, I'm not comparing you to
Joffrey. I'm
joking. Ashea Joffrey. Last name, yeah. So the bit about Aerys, we don't know when that happened in their lifetimes. When did Aerys rediscover that prophecy? He says King Aerys discovered it. Meaning, now, is he referring to him that way because he's currently the king and he discovered it at some point? Or did he discover it when he was king? I kind of think he discovered it before he became king. But I'm not sure about that. Either way, Daeron's intense dreams, their brothers, like, again, they all had dragon dreams, it seems like, or dreams of dragons, which may not have been supernatural, because Aemon's quote there isn't specific. It's like, yes, Egg definitely dreamt of dragons, like restoring them, but did he have prophetic dreams? I don't know. Aemon himself dreamt of leathern wings and hot breath and all these other things. Now, was that prophetic? Or just he's dreaming of dragons? Again, I don't know. Daeron, though, it's 100% certain that he had prophetic dreams.
I think it's interesting, the idea of if Aemon had prophetic dreams about like when he was really old, the dragon that he interacts with is Jon at the wall, right? So if he had those kind of obscured prophetic dreams, like what would he have dreamt of, and misinterpreted? You know what I mean? Like if he saw an ice dragon or anything that was more symbolic.
You wonder if that's a great idea. You wonder if he had some of those dreams and just dismissed them. And then later in life, as these things were happening, as these miracles were happening, he's like reviewing those old dreams and like, wait, maybe I shouldn't have been dismissive of those.
Yeah,
but by the time he's 100, he can't necessarily remember them all.
Yeah. No, he needed to write them down like Helena.
Yeah, or Daenerys, yeah. So either way, so Daeron is our anchor here because we know for sure whatever other dreams were happening and whether they were prophetic or not or proven to be prophetic. Daeron's definitely were. And that would again be like, well, if my brother's got dreams that tell the future, that might again have them asking questions about their own dreams. And it would also just be personal for them that their brother was having prophetic dreams. They're like, yes, this is clearly like, yes, this happens in our family. This is a reminder. This is real. This is not a legend. This is a real thing. And maybe some of those dreams would be directed to them. Like Daeron saw Dunk and had a dream about Dunk right away. So what dreams did Daeron have about Aemon? Maybe Daeron had dreams of him in a black cloak and it's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, oh, that's dreaming of you being a maester.
Aemon, I dreamed you were old.
Aemon, I dreamed you were old.
Yeah.
That's brutal, but also hilarious. Yeah, it's like, well, that's a good sign. I'm going to grow old. I'm going to not die prematurely. All right. That's good, right? It's important to remember, too, Nina writes, that these are for young Targaryens in this era. Dragons were not some distant ancient memory. When the Targaryens and their Valyrian predecessors had ridden and hatched dragons, that was thousands of years they were doing that. It only had recently stopped. So, in one sense, yeah, it was fairly recent. In another sense, they're a whole new breed of Valyrian. And they wouldn't want to think of themselves as lesser without having dragons. So they would do other things maybe to pump themselves up and to feel worthy of their ancestors. And there would be a lot of that from the adults given to the children, as Aemon and Egg were. And there were people that they could talk to that had seen dragons. Like Sir Arlen of Pennytree saw the last dragon. Right? So like Dunk heard about it from him. So I mean, Egg would have had, and Aemon would have had vastly more options for people to talk to that had living memory of dragons, or at least had one degree of separation from that. And if we want to get technical, and of course we do, Aemon's great-great-great-grandparents were Rhaenyra and Daemon. So that's all you have to do to get to dragon riders and their families go back that far. And those two died only, 75 to 78 years before Aemon and Aegon. So not super long, not even a century. And that's part of what makes it so easy for them to dream and play and imagine, is that it was not that long ago that their ancestors were doing it for real, And all the culture and artwork and jewelry and everything around them was dragons. Like this is how their family lived for thousands of years. Just because the dragons were gone, it doesn't mean they're just going to, okay, well, let's change all the heraldry now. Let's turn it into, I don't know, a sheep, a fish, No, there's still dragons everywhere. So Aemon probably heard about the prophecy before he went to the Citadel, is another conclusion we can reach to here. If King Aerys read about the dragons coming back, if he did that before he became king, then Aemon heard about this idea from a very early age. And even if he didn't, even if he heard about it, while he was at the Citadel, that's still, a big deal. That's still something that Aemon's like, well, I'm going to go look. What book was that, uncle? What book were you reading? We might have a copy here at the Citadel. I want to read that book too. That's what I would do. And this is a bookish guy, so it's not a stretch that he would want to read the same sources, the same books that led Aerys to that conclusion. Aemon would want to read that. Aemon was invested and interested in the return of dragons. He dreamt of his egg hatching just like his brother did, just like his uncles do, just like his grandfather did. They all think it's coming back. They don't know when, but if there's clues in the books the bookish people would be all over that. And Aemon is at the tip of that spear. And remember, he tells Sam about his own dreams of dragons. Again, we don't know if those are prophetic, and neither does he. Again, that's such a weird thing. You know dragon dreams might be prophetic, you just don't know if yours are. And that's the kind of thing that Aemon and Egg and a lot of these other Targaryens would have dealt with that same thing. But the difference with Aemon is he would have a lot more context. He would be able to read about a lot of his ancestors. He would have a scholarly approach to this, but there still wouldn't be answers. Again, it all comes back to their family only exists because of a dream by their ancestor Daenys. They would have all died. So they have to take dreams seriously. It's built into their family that dreams 100% matter. You can't survive the doom and because of that survival rule a continent and say, dreams don't matter. It's just images. It's just synapses firing as we sleep. It's just random images in your head. No, the Targaryens would never, ever believe that. They would tell you to shut up, fool. I wouldn't be here talking to you if it weren't for dreams. Yeah. And of course, the big downsides, all this later leads to Summerhall. When Aemon says, my brothers dreamed of dragons, every one, and all of them died because of it, he's referring to Summerhall in the case of the brother he loved most. Of course, by then, Aemon had been on the wall for 25 years, so that's not exactly the scope of this episode, but it's certainly relevant to mention. So his education begins 207, 208. We don't know what he was like back then. He seems like he was more adult than a lot of kids might have been. He might have been more mature than a lot of, but he's still going to be very young. He's still 9 or 10. He's not going to be he's not like a Jojen probably, where he's just so serious about everything because he's already seen the future. He's already like getting visions of the future like Jojen was. I don't know that Aemon was quite that beaten down by his own dreams and visions, because I don't think he had them that seriously, if he had them at all. Now, interesting experience being a Targaryen at the Citadel. Some people might hate him because of his birth and think that he doesn't deserve any of the special treatment he gets, even if he doesn't ask for it. Because I don't think Aemon asked for special treatment. He doesn't seem like the person that would ask for it. He seems like he would want to be treated normally, but that just wouldn't be possible. Right? There would be people who would curry favor with him because of who he is. Other people would hate him because of who he is. You just can't, who he is, his last name, you can't ignore it. You can't pretend it's not there, which is ironic. Because Aemon reminds Jon and Stannis and other maesters. He's like, sorry, let me say it again. Aemon reminds Jon and Stannis and others that maesters give up their family name. He's like, I'm not Targaryen. I'm just Aemon. I'm just a maester of the Citadel. When it never occurred to me, reading those chapters until making this episode, that Aemon has been saying that probably since he was 10 years old. He's been reminding people that maesters give up their last name. When he says this to Jon and Stannis, it's the 1,000th time he's said it. He's had a lot of practice in saying those words. It's like, I'm just an Aemon, a maester of the Citadel, you know? There's no Targaryen, yeah. Now, and despite Jon and Stannis' examples, it's true. For the most part, Aemon being a Targ wasn't relevant. On the Wall, people did eventually forget. But why did they forget? There weren't physical reminders. His eyes are white, not purple. They've gone milky white with age. His Targaryen hair, well, it's gone. He's bald, but it would have gone white before that. So you wouldn't even have the silvery gold to remind people. But when he's 9 or 10, he's got purple eyes and silvery gold hair. You can't hide that. I mean, you might be able to hide the hair with dye, but there's no evidence he did that. And they would know who he is anyway. It wouldn't do any good. No, we know who you are, Aemon Targaryen. You can't hide. You know, it just wouldn't work. So he just wouldn't have been an ordinary maester. Even if he tried to be treated normally, just tried to be one of the guys, it wouldn't have been possible. So that's just a part of his schooling experience. You know, it just would have been like that. Like his family sit in the throne. There's no escaping that. Now, we don't have a lot of specific clues about his time there. But we don't have zero. Here's one. Quote.
Yes, I dreamt of Old Town, Sam. I was young again, and my brother Egg was with me with that big knight he served. We were drinking in the old inn, where they make the fearsomely strong cider.
This is not nearly as sad as, Egg, I dreamed I was old. But it clearly relates to that. It's the same time frame. He's dreaming of his youth, his time with Egg. The cider is served at the Quill and Tankard. That's the same inn we see at the beginning of A Feast for Crows in the prologue. So Aemon has a lot of dreams. Like, again, we don't have nearly all of them detailed, but it comes up again. He dreams he's old. He dreams of Old Town. He, dreams of dragons and leather wings and hot breath, all that stuff. But there's no reason to assume those dreams only started when he was an older man. So yeah, he's probably having those dreams when he was young. Given his older brother and having prophetic dreams, it would just be a big deal from a very early age to something to keep track of and think about. And the reason I keep bringing this up is because at the Citadel, perhaps more so than any other place in the world, even though the Red Keep has great libraries and the Dragonstone probably does too, and Summerhall may have as well, this is the Citadel, though. These are the best books in the world are here, as far as we know. And as he got older, his subject matter interest would probably mature over time. But what I'm getting at is he would have an opportunity to look into a lot of these topics that plague his family or were of an interest to his family, like dragon dreams, like the return of dragons, like, I don't know, glamours. Did he study glamours because of Shiera and Bloodraven? Is he like, what is up with this? I've seen it. It's got to be real. How does it work? Are there books on it? Now, it gets tricky here because the Citadel isn't hyper friendly to supernatural ideas, right? They're a little down on some of that. Some archmaesters more than others, but they're not entirely down on it, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't give out Valyrian steel links to people who study the higher mysteries. So there's clearly it's some acceptance of that, right? Maybe less than there used to be, but it's still there.
Do you have any thoughts on which links you think Aemon specialized in?
Yes, actually, that's coming a little later.
Okay,
so yeah,
cool.
we'll get to
that
very shortly.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, me and Nina did a little work on that. That's pretty fun. And in fact, some of them are mentioned. So we do have a few like specific examples. Now, someone like Aemon might have more clout in terms because he's a Targaryen. We in the TV show had this restricted area of books. There's no reason to assume that's a thing in the books as well. Well, there might be, though. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility out of hand either. The Citadel definitely has locked areas that people don't have access to. That's why Jaqen in disguise stole a key, so that he could get to books, the rare books area, or one of the rare books areas. So yeah, I guess I should say they do have that area in the Citadel. It just doesn't have, what I mean is it's not necessarily the same version of what we saw on TV. Don't assume that at all. But something like that, yes, and maybe Aemon would have maybe had to earn his way into that. But maybe it was easier for him because of his name. Maybe he was on the fast track. But it seems like he may have earned it anyway. Like, the guy was legitimately good at what he did. On the other hand, something to keep in mind is this isn't that long after the era of Baelor the Blessed, burner of books. So books on the higher mysteries might have been harder to come by after so many were burned less than 45, 50 years ago, or around that time. So I don't know. Nevertheless, he would have an interest in things like past dreamers. And of course, like I said, prophecies, glamours, and obviously dragons. And we can feel very confident of that because think of when he gets to Braavos and he hears about Daenerys and the rumors of Daenerys, and he's like, oh, the princess that was promised. He gets so energized. Sam is amazed at, this is a guy that could barely get out of bed. But this news, this discovery of dragons being born again, it's made him into a younger man. Of course, that he's not able to keep that up, but it temporarily energizes him in a very surprising way. It just goes to show that studies and knowledge and truths are really the thing that matters to him so much, but also how that affects his family. So it's really two things that matter to him the most: his studies and his family. But let's think about more mundane things in terms of his dreams, like besides his dreams, rather. Like he might have an interest in, he's definitely a healer. That's the first thing he's introduced as, cutting away the frostbite ears. He delivered lots of children. He sewed Jon up. That's well established. He's a good healer. Maybe he took an interest in Targaryen madness. Maybe he took an interest in mental health and was like, why does this happen to our family? Why is our family particularly plagued by this? It's the kind of thing that, would be doing his family a great service by looking into their genetic issues. He wouldn't call it that, but that's what it is. If like my family has a history of heart disease, I would want to be aware of that. And if I was a doctor, that might be a big boon to my whole family if I could figure out the specifics of my specific family's heart disease issues, right? So Aemon's could research mental health, which there might not be a lot of literature on that in this world, but still, there might be lots of history on Targaryen madness. Like, the Targaryens are famous, and there'd be a lot of things written about them. Maybe he could reach some conclusions on that. During the decade or so that Aemon was at the Citadel, some major events happened that would have mattered to him personally or impacted his life in some way, and a few personal moments directly related to him as well. The tourney of Ashford Meadow was in 209, for example. That's the Hedge Knight, of course. That's roughly 2 years after he started on his Maester's chain. So he would have been a year and a half, 2 years into his training when Baelor Breakspear died and all the realm mourned, and that would have been a sad thing. But on a personal level, what did he think of Egg becoming squire to Dunk? Like, it was like, my brother is now traveling with a Hedge Knight. That's interesting. I think some of members of Egg's family would be bothered by that, but I don't think Aemon would be bothered by that. That pride doesn't seem like, he doesn't have this royal pride that a lot of Targaryens have. The way he conducts himself, I doubt he would project it on his brother, who he loved so much. So
it's kind of weird to call him the Big Knight in that quote we read earlier.
Big Knight,
he knew this Big Knight pretty well. Like, he probably hung out with him quite a lot.
That might just be George just
trying to be a little
cagey about it.
Yeah, I think it's a writing trick. I do. I think.
Later that same year, though, was a much bigger deal. The Great Spring Sickness. That killed off King Daeron, who we said was probably a big influence on, maybe even authority figure, an aspirational figure for Aemon. I feel fairly strongly about that. So that would have been a big deal. Valar and Mataris as well, and just many others. The Faith were hit particularly hard by it because they work with the sick. And of course, it's not said, but that would very likely apply to Maesters too, right? You'd think a lot of Maesters would have gotten sick working with a contagious infectious disease. So that would hit Old Town particularly hard because that's the heart of Maesterdom and it's the heart of the Faith. Although that had started to shift to King's Landing by this time, still, the Faith still had a huge presence in Old Town. Maybe we'll say by this era they were the second largest center of the Faith. But still, a big center of the Faith. So you'd see a lot of people there died because of this. And worse, beyond just the Faith and the Maesters, Old Town was the second hardest hit by the Great Spring Sickness. It hit the population centers hardest. So Old Town was the second hardest hit because it's the second largest population center. King's Landing was hit the hardest because it's the biggest. So Aemon was at risk. He could have died from this. If there was ever much to the notion that Targaryens have a boost against disease, which I believe in, I think it's small, but it's there. But the Great Spring Sickness clearly was not on the list of diseases that the Targaryens could get over easily or dodge because, well, clearly it killed the king and several other Targaryens. So obviously, it could have killed Aemon too. Could have, He couldn't have been immune, or it wouldn't, unless some Targaryens have it and others don't. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it. And the Great Spring Sickness lasted for quite a while. It lasted into the following year. King's Landing actually used wildfire to burn all the excess bodies, and that backfired a bit. Pun intended. A quarter of the city burned down. I don't know how Old Town handled it, though. We don't hear anything about burnings, but they had to do something to deal with all those bodies, and it would have made more people sick handling those bodies. Again, the horrors of a world that doesn't understand infectious diseases and germ theory very well, or at all. And of course, that led to a new coronation. Aerys I, the bookish Aerys I, replaced Daeron II on the Iron Throne. So I really, again, wonder what kind of relationship Aemon had with Aerys, if at all. If he looked up to him, if he saw him as a kindred spirit. I'm not sure. The year 210, the tail end of the Great Spring Sickness, seems to be when Dunk and Egg visited. This is when we had that quote about them drinking the fearsomely strong cider at the Quill and Tankard. That's when this happened. Sometime in mid to late 210. It says during the Great Spring Sickness they visited in one source, which I really don't think that's true. Why would you go to the second most infected place in the middle of a disease outbreak? They were in Dorne before that, and Dorne was not affected much at all because it's so sparsely populated and spread out. So it's like, seems like you would just wait it out and not, let's go, We
got a good comment here from Your Eyes Tosh. I don't think that this spring sickness was all that great.
It was the bad spring sickness. And this is when Aemon gave them the mule named Maester and measured Dunk. And Dunk is always like, I'm an inch shy of 7 foot, making him 6'11", I suppose. So the following year is 211. That had a severe drought and even more severe Greyjoy attacks from Dagon Greyjoy. But it doesn't appear he attacked Old Town, so that may have just been a bit of news to Aemon. Sometime between 212 and 216, though, Rhaegal and Aerys? Rhaegal and Alyce Arryn had Daenora Targaryen, who, though much younger than Aerion, would marry his brother Aerion. Too bad for her. That's no fun. And then also, that is when the so-called Second Blackfyre Rebellion happened, as seen in the Mystery Night, the year 212. Aemon surely heard about it after the fact. Egg may have written him and told him about it, and it would have been just news that a lot of people heard about. It was a big deal, even though it wasn't as big deal as any of the other Blackfyre Rebellions. It was still a big deal. And of course, we know the most about it because it's in story form. In the year 215, I almost said 2015, almost did it again. His uncle, Prince Rhaegal, died from choking on pie. When someone dies from choking on food, it's extremely suspicious, right, in this world. I mean, on the other hand, it's very much outside of the scope of this episode to discuss that, but I did want to mention it. 2 years later, Rhaegal's son, Aelor, died, and then his twin, Aelora, became grief-stricken, and she would commit suicide within a year or two. So that whole branch of the family was nearly wiped out. You got the father dying, the son and daughter dying, and then the younger daughter, very early on in her life, is betrothed to Aerion. In the year 217, Aemon finished forging his chain. Here's where we will discuss what it may have contained. For fun, Grand Maester Pycelle was born 1 year prior to Aemon finishing his chain. So you think of how old Pycelle is, and he is nowhere near as old as Aemon. Aemon was already finishing his chain a year before Pycelle was born. I'm sorry, no, but the other way around. Pycelle was born a year before Aemon finished his chain, in the year 216. So it looks like Aemon was at the Citadel for a good 9 to 10 years. We'll call it an even decade. He was finished at the year when he was 19. We have the year he finished, just not quite the year he started exactly. So Jon observes his chain. He sees, quote, gold and silver links glinting amongst iron, lead, tin, and other base metals. Silver is medicine. That's a fact, and we've already gone over how Aemon is a renowned healer. It seems like it may have been one of the things he most aspired to be and or was the most talented in out of all these things that he has academic credentials for. I love calling these little chains academic credentials. It's like if you wore your PhD around your neck. That'd be pretty cool. Iron is warcraft. He's got that one, so that one makes sense. I mean, he was playing war games as an 8-year-old, so he had a head start on that one. A lot of royal princelings definitely have a head start on learning warcraft. Now, we don't know what lead and tin are. Nina headcanons them as architecture and natural science or geography. But we don't know. So, whatever. I have nothing to say about that because we just don't know. And we don't know what the other base metals could be. I don't even know what base metals mean.
It's probably like not gold or silver. So like your irons, your titanium.
Okay. Maybe pewter.
So like, I think like iron, for example, like the black iron that is for Ravenry. Mm-hmm. That's probably one of the base metals. I would guess, right?
You're right. Yeah.
He has. I think that has to be one of them. Ravenry.
I would agree. Yes, yeah. I would agree. Yeah, he certainly tends the ravens. That's one of the main things he does at Castle Black. Not all are mentioned. So I'm going to assume Valyrian Steel's in there, even though Jon didn't take note of it, because he has a lot of familiarity with Higher Mysteries. He talks about Dragon Dreams. He marks a page in the Jade Compendium for Jon when he leaves the wall. He's like, Jon, I marked a page for you in this explicitly supernatural text. So I definitely think it's a safe bet that he studied that. Maybe he didn't get a link for it, but he knows about it, whether he forged that part of his chain or not. So I think we can give him the credential, whether he bears it or not. The gold link is also hard to tell because gold, there's two types of gold links. There's the red and the yellow. One is for like accounting, and the other is, I don't
Sums
recall.
And numbers.
Oh yeah, one is accounting and one is just regular
like money
arithmetic.
And accounts.
Yeah, accounting versus just math. Yeah. And Nina thinks red gold is probably sums and numbers, and yellow gold is for money and accounts. But 50-50 chance she's right at least. Also important to point out that maesters can get multiple links of the same metal. You can double up on gold just to show that you are extremely good at it. You know, you're like, I'm double skilled at Ravencraft or Warcraft. Like, I'm the War Maester. I've got a giant black... No, that's the other one. Yeah, the light iron. Yeah. Now, a famous quote from Aemon is his 3 trials that he refers to, right? He says he was tested 3 times. The 3rd time he was definitely already on the wall, so we can ignore that one for now. The first one, he says he was a boy, so he definitely wasn't on the wall. The middle one, it's debatable, and we'll discuss why, but we are pretty sure it was also pre-wall. So 2 of those 3 tests came in his before he turned 35, based on our best guesses, that is. So we'll say the first test, probably something that happened at the Citadel, or not long after. It's unlikely to come before that, because what formative life choice is going to happen that tests his vows when he's 9 or 10? What vow exactly could he even be breaking at 10? He is not a chained and sworn maester by that age. Not very likely when he's 11 or 12 or 13 either. So it seems like this test came when he actually had a vow that he could break. Otherwise, what's the test, you know? So Adina agrees that around the time he forged his chain or just after is our best guess for when this middle test or this first test occurred, especially because he still refers to himself as a boy, even though I don't think he's literally a boy at like 10 years old or something. We're thinking, well, this is a centenarian referring to himself as a boy. So you got a little wiggle room as to what that means. Let's actually have the quote, though, because it's so meaningful and it sets up the further analysis here. Quote.
"It hurts, boy," he said softly. "Oh, yes, choosing. It has always hurt, and always will. I know."
"You don't know," Jon said bitterly. "No one knows. Even if I'm his bastard, he's still my father."
Maester Aemon sighed. "Have you heard nothing I've told you, Jon? Do you think you are the first?" He shook his ancient head, a gesture weary beyond words. "3 times the gods saw fit to test my vows. Once when I was a boy, once in the fullness of my manhood, and once when I had grown old. By then, my strength was fled, my eyes grown dim, yet that last choice was as cruel as my first."
Getting dusty in here, y'all. So Aemon says, yeah, he was a boy. So again, a little wider range for a guy his age, a 100-year-old talking about something that happened at least 8 decades ago. He probably thought himself as a boy, given how much he's learned since then. And again, testing his vows. He specifically says tested his vows, and he didn't have vows when he was 12, 13, or whatever. It has to have forged his chain. So it has to have been at least 19 years old, which supports the idea that he was calling himself a boy even in his early 20s. I don't think it's him refusing to be on his father's council. That is a thing that happens later, that when Maekar ascends, he brings all his sons to court, but Aemon decides to go serve at Dragonstone instead. We'll get to that, but I don't think that's a test. That wasn't testing his vows. He still remained a maester. What vow? Right? It doesn't quite work, although it's an interesting idea, so I think we can eliminate that one. And here's the other quirk to this mystery. Maekar dies in the year 221. I'm sorry. Aerys dies in the year 221, and Maekar becomes king in the year 221. If Aemon forges his chain at 217 and then goes to court and then Dragonstone in 221, there's a 4-year window that we don't know where Aemon was. We're told after graduating the Citadel, he went to serve at some lordling's castle. Some lordling. That's really all we know. So that 4-year window, when he's first become a maester, is first living out in the world, for the first time ever, mind you, he even lived at court, Summerhall, and the Citadel. Now he's living in some castle, who knows where. Could be the North, could be the freaking Iron Islands for all we know. Could be in Dorne, really no idea. But lordling does at least mean it wasn't some major house. It didn't say they wouldn't be able to conceal that. It says ling. Lord ling means smaller lord, lesser lord. So we can only narrow it down a little bit. That doesn't help us a lot.
It's not the Tyrells. It's not the Starks.
It only eliminates like 20 houses at most. Maybe 30. There's hundreds left after that. So yeah, it doesn't really help us much. But it fits really well that this would be where he had that temptation, where meets a girl that he's tempted to cheat with or something, where it would be a breaking his vows. This is also, when he's at his most handsome, when he's younger, if
he takes after the Targaryens, he's probably a pretty, attractive prospect to a lot of people, and he would have looked unique and probably been pretty polite, mannerly, well-spoken, articulate. I could see a girl swooping.
A lot of girls would like that. Yeah. He's exotic-looking, handsome, regal. The their culture says he's very handsome. He has the royal features. So Nina agrees. We're kind of like, this fits so well that he fell in love with someone at his first posting and had to choose. He had to reinforce his decision to be a maester and had to reject that temptation. And it's the one Aemon warns Jon about specifically when he's telling Jon honor and duty seem like little compared to, quote, a woman's love and, quote, a newborn son. These are exact phrases he uses to Jon, things that he probably wrestled with himself. He sees Jon wrestling with that, and he recalls his own trials of the same nature. It's maybe foreshadowed with Pate at A Feast for Crows, right? Deciding he'd rather run away with Rosie than stick with learning to be a maester now. To be fair, Pate is a crappy maester. But still, the temptation of love can be overpowering no matter how good you are at your job. I would say I lean towards this interpretation, that it was a love test that almost made maybe after drinking some fearsomely strong cider.
Yeah. I'm like, and honestly, for me, if it wasn't love, what do I think it was? I don't think there's a stronger contender here.
Yeah, like what else? What other vows do maesters take that would be such a difficulty for him? Like, oh no, I was really tempted to go to war. Yeah. I was really tempted to take charge.
Yeah, I was tempted to get a castle. Like what? Like, yeah exactly.
It's really hard to think of anything. Yeah, besides love. It's just, and it's so thematically appropriate to his role in the story as a mentor to Jon, who is struggling with that exact thing, and his connection to his family. Like Aemon is so much like Jon, duty first, family tricky, and confusing.
Think of Egg. That was Egg's dilemma was, marriage for love, right?
Yes, so true.
If Aemon had gone through that in his own way, it's all resonant with one another. I think it just makes a lot of sense. Like, I'd love to hear if anyone has another theory for what his second test could have been.
Yeah,
but I don't have one that I like more.
I don't either. And Nina adds another great detail here. It would also contrast with Egg. Both brothers perhaps tempted off their respective paths of duty by falling in love. But Egg chose love over duty. Egg married Beth of Blackwood. He rejected his father's chosen, or whoever chose his bride for him. Whether it was his sister or whoever. We don't know all the details, but definitely he chose love over duty. His duty was to marry the bride picked for him, and he didn't. And Aemon remained a maester. He stuck with his duty, apparently, whatever this temptation was, assuming we're right about our theory. Arya Saxena says maybe he was posted at a Blackfyre loyalist lord and his test was to stay neutral like a maester and not favor his own family. Excellent segue to this next portion, which is indeed the Blackfyre Rebellion number 3. The Blackfyre Rebellion we know the least about, but which was the most close to winning by the Blackfyre side, other than maybe the first one. So it was the most serious. It was the second most important of the Blackfyre Rebellions after the first one. And it was halfway through this 4-year stint. So Arya Saxena, you are on target with your timeline. We realized the same thing when writing this episode. If he was posted to a Blackfyre loyalist house, it could have, there's a number of things that could have come up that would have been difficult, dangerous, conflicting with his duty. What if the house he was posted at were Daemon Blackfyre Blackfyre loyalists? What does he do? He's like, I'm just a maester. Again, I'm just a maester. My last name doesn't matter.
I'm thinking about if we talk about Aemon being harsh or not mincing words, if he has a sharp tongue sometimes.
He might be like, you shouldn't do this. I'm like, oh, you're only saying that because you're a Targaryen. He's like,
Yeah.
no, it's a bad idea. No, I'm saying it because you will lose. And he'd have been right. The Blackfyres did lose. Whatever his advice was, we don't actually know. Maybe this is irrelevant. Maybe he ended up at a house that supported the Reds and he was fine. Didn't matter at all. But again, this is like a coin flip. It was like 50-50 chance maybe that he was with a Blackfyre house.
Was the realm split 50-50?
Nah, probably not 50-50,
Okay.
but
60-40?
maybe 60-40, and the Blackfyres were most popular with the lesser houses, and this is a lordling. So again, maybe it is close to 50-50 given it definitely wasn't one of the major houses he was posted with. Yeah, it's interesting. Really interesting consideration. He would have been tempted either by a daughter or by the Blackfyres or by the reverse or maybe both. Yeah, would he have felt disloyal if he was doing his duty to a house that was against his own family? Like, what a weird conundrum. That's really hard. And this is it touches on the trials.
Do they teach that at the Citadel, the chain of command? Like, if your lord says one way, do you side with your lord? Or do you sign with the archmaesters or the king? Or like, if the archmaester gives you a command, like the grand maester, like, who do the maesters consider the ultimate supreme authority? Like, even if they publicly say king, privately, are they like, no, you listen to the other maesters?
Or do they listen to the lord of their castle because they're chained to that? This is the final word. I mean, maybe the king goes beyond that, but yeah, you're right. What is the chain of command for? It's funny to ask. The chain of command for the chained maesters. They should also wear their rank. They got their PhDs, their doctorates, and their rank. It's all those things together. So the death of Aerys was in 221, 2 years after the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. Maekar ascends to the throne. It was the unlikely gets less unlikely all the time. So we have the fourth son as king. What was so weird about Maekar ascending in the year 221 was that a lot of Targaryens died during the Great Spring Sickness. Then Aerys dies, Rhaegal and his children die, and one of them marries Aerion. Maekar lost none of his children. All 6 of his kids were still alive at this point. His branch is like untouched.
You have to be suspicious.
Maybe
if you're superstitious.
If you're superstitious, you're suspicious.
You're not
yes.
necessarily even suspicious of Maekar, but you are suspicious that either the first branch was cursed and they did something bad, or that another branch has like blighted them. Like you might think that they brought it upon themselves. Is my point. Like, so superstitions are not always about there being a perpetrator. Sometimes it's about someone being bad. And
they might, and the blame would maybe fall on Bloodraven, the guy like this, the guy that people are suspicious about, that they're superstitious about, and he's ruled all this time. He had lots of people preaching against him, and he would kill people that did that. So that wouldn't shut them up. That would only make them. Well, it might make them shut up, but it would make them more suspicious in a lot of cases. And the weird thing is, though, that Maekar is a kinslayer. So it's like, wait, why is this the branch that's doing so well when this is the kinslaying branch? Like, what the hell, y'all? The prevailing wisdom would be peculiar because there's no logic here. If you're trying to frame this in Supernatural, it just doesn't work. It's kind of random.
You have to take the long view. Like, if you look at it from 60 years later, right, you're like, okay, that was cursed.
Yeah,
he was cursed from that kinslaying, and that's what killed off that previous branch, and that's what made Egg be like, if you're like really locked into your superstitions, I think you justify it.
Yes.
And someone who like has seen this all play out, like an old 70-year-old, is like, yeah, Maekar was cursed.
Yeah, Maekar's reign was not good. Like, lots of bad things happened. Yes, the Great Spring Sickness was not on his watch, but the long summer that was brutal, it doesn't sound like it would be so bad, but it was terrible, happened under his watch. So did a worse plague in Old Town than the Great Spring Sickness. It wasn't worse overall, but it was worse for Old Town. It was the Great Plague. And Aemon dodged it because his father became king. Well, I shall explain. So again, none of Maekar's 6 children died in the meantime, even though Maekar outlived all of his own brothers and all their children. All of them died, except for Daenora, the one daughter of Rhaegal who lived, and she married into Maekar's branch. So they might have felt, like, others might have looked at them as cursed either then or later, but they might have felt special because of that. Like, well, we seem ordained. Now, Aemon might not have looked at it that way, But he might have been curious. He might not have taken it for granted. He might have considered himself lucky, blessed, or don't look a gift horse in the mouth, whatever kind of thing. Still, it was notable. No matter how you take it, whether you look at it as supernatural or not, it's notable and unusual. So Maekar called his sons to court upon taking the throne, as we said a long time back. And that may have saved Aemon's life indirectly, because, the Great Summer happened. It was super hot and muggy for years, for like 7 years. And the Grey Plague hit, like I said. Maester Pycelle tells Ned Stark very early in A Game of Thrones that he uses an example of the Hightower Lord was killed for doing the right thing. And he compares him to Tywin, just like Tywin had to do the right thing, but sometimes doing the right thing is unpopular. Now, Maester Pycelle was lucky. 3/4 of the Citadel died during the Grey Plague. Maester Pycelle was among the 25% who did not die. Now, since Aemon, of course, wasn't there, but of course it would have a deep impact on him. 3/4 of the people he had just been studying with, living with, friends, colleagues, dead. All of that's personally devastating, most likely. Not to mention devastating for the realm. That is a lot of accumulated academic knowledge that would be the reason for saving lives and building roads and just all the things that education does for society. Losing 3/4 of its greatest minds is obviously quite devastating. And ironically, we just had 2 kings that were pretty pro-learning. Daeron the Good surrounded his court full of learned people, maesters. Aerys was bookish. Definitely cared about learning. So ironically, it's Aemon's father who would be the least friendly to learning and maesterly types. Not saying he was hostile to it, but the bar was high from the last 2 kings. It's kind of ironic that the son, the one whose father is a king, the maester's father is the one who's the least maesterly. But anyway, Maekar, more of a warrior. Again, we said it many times, and I'll say it again. Maekar's best comparison is Stannis. Right? And Stannis respected learning. He respected merit of all kinds, but he just respected swords and armies and power more. And I think Maekar, same deal. But Aemon, again, wasn't there for it. Aemon wasn't there for Maekar's reign. He wasn't at court because, yes, his father invited him there and was like, hey, I want you to be part of my council. But Aemon was very duty-minded. And his father was going too far. He did not want to, especially at his age, he's 23. He doesn't want to overstep the authority within the Citadel, which is Maekar going to listen to Aemon or the Grand Maester, whose job is to advise the king? If Aemon is jumped over the Grand Maester, well, that doesn't look good. And he was afraid of that happening. And I guess he was probably right to fear that because it's probably what his father was indicating. His father was probably hinting at that. So Aemon's like, nah, Dad, I respect this. Thank you for inviting me, but this is improper. I'm not doing it. So he goes and to his father's credit, he didn't order him otherwise because as a king, he could say, no, you're staying here. You're a maester. You serve. You're my son. You serve. You do what I say. He said, I'm going to Dragonstone. And his father said, okay. And that was fine because the Prince of Dragonstone is Maekar's eldest son. So he's still serving the family. He's just not serving at court. He's serving at Dragonstone. He's serving the heir to the throne instead of the king. Not a big change as far as family hierarchy. And this is interesting because living with Daeron, observing him up close, seeing his dreams, talking about his dreams maybe. Now, when Aemon was young, he wouldn't have necessarily had the wherewithal to understand this fully. But now he's an adult. He's got his chain. He's had a lifetime to think about this. Yeah, he's only 23, but this is a big difference from being 10 or 11 or even younger and not knowing how to contextualize his brother's dreams. He's got a lot different perspective on it by this point. So as Egg was his closest brother when he was young, I suspect maybe Daeron was his closest brother when he was in his 20s. Not necessarily that he loved him more, but just he saw him every day. He's his maester. And Daeron's not the kind of guy who's like out and about, going out on adventures. He doesn't go much farther than the brothel. And this was a guy already worn down. When we see him in the Hedge Knight, he seems older than he is because he's just burdened by his dreams and his alcoholism. And that's going to age you quickly. That is a hard life. That is living hard. You are not, and he's not in good physical shape. And that the burden on his personal being is going to really have extended. This is 12 years after the Hedge Knight. So 12 years more of drinking and never getting good sleep or rarely getting good sleep. I mean, that's why he drinks, to block out the dreams. And alcohol doesn't make for great sleep, y'all. I mean, yeah, like hangovers, like you never get good sleep after a night of drinking. And it sounds like this guy was just drinking all the time every day. So yeah, hard life. And I feel like Aemon, the kind of man he is, would have a lot of sympathy for his brother, would maybe try to help him, would research and give him medicines and just anything to try to take some of his burden off, to try to ease his suffering. But there wouldn't be a whole lot he could do. You know, what answer do you have for the diagnosis is recurring prophetic dreams? What medicine do you have for that? I mean, he was self-medicating. I don't know that Aemon could have done a whole lot else. It's just a bad life, just a bad way to be born. And again, we referred to this earlier, but something else that would be of interest to Aemon is Kiera of Tyrosh, Daeron's wife, who Kiera and Daeron probably didn't have a great relationship given, I mean, how can you be a great partner when you are this burdened by mental health and alcoholism, which the two go together, right? So Kiera might have been lonely. She's from Essos. She's a political wife, basically. She's not there because she wants to be. And she didn't really have a family. She married Valar and had 2 stillborn sons, and then didn't get pregnant again till at some point during this reign, this time at Dragonstone, she had one child, probably delivered by Aemon. Unfortunately, this child was feeble-witted, which the one silver lining there is she was ignored when the succession came along, and maybe that's a good thing. You don't necessarily, to crown her is to kill her, you know? You don't, she would have been a pawn. This was our other Paella girl, Vaea. Vaea, yes. Vaea, Daea, yes, the spicy Targaryens. Now, I wonder if Maekar continued to consult Aemon or consulted him at all, despite him going to live at Dragonstone. One in particular I think of is the issue of Danelle Lothston. Danelle Lothston, of course, supposedly turned to the black arts and was brought down during the reign of Maekar, perhaps by Maekar personally. Like, Maekar seems like the kind of guy that would lead the campaign himself. After all, that's what got him killed when he led the campaign against the rebellious Peaks at Starpike. He died himself by getting too close to the walls and got crushed by a stone. So I think if he did that, he probably was personally there for the fall of Danelle Lothston. Given she so-called turned to the black arts, maybe Maekar asked Aemon about that, what knowledge he might have on her, or about, you know, can you cast some light on this darkness? All these my men are superstitious. They don't want to go against this so-called witch. What can we do to get rid of this stupid belief that they have? That's kind of how I think Maekar would look at it. He's like, this superstition's like, she's not bathing in blood, or if she is, it's just stupid. It's not actually doing anything. It's nothing to fear. I feel like Maekar would have this hardline stance on, she's just a woman, you know, like, don't let this rumor fool you. She's not casting spells. But he might, like, check to be sure. Like, what, Aemon, she's not actually casting spells, right? You know, that's what I said, but I want to double check. So, and just what does he think of Harrenhal in general? A weird place that's supposedly cursed? Like, what is an academic like Aemon who's open to the higher mysteries? What does he think of Harrenhal? I wonder if he ever even went there. Probably not. And Maekar may have also discussed the succession with Aemon. Jaehaerys did the same with his maester, son Vagon, and, you know, the one who was an archmaester that we discussed earlier. And Maekar may have looked to Aemon for similar advice. I mean, this is an educated man. He would know things about the succession, and he clearly trusted his son. He clearly was proud of him, even though he wasn't a warrior like he may have wanted. He still respected his son's intelligence and his sense of duty, because I think that is something that impressed a lot of people about Aemon, was his dedication to duty. All right, just a little bit left here. Daeron died at some point. We don't know when. He died of a pox, which gives us a kind of a gnarly and unpleasant idea of what kind of day-to-day chores Daeron indirectly inflicted on his maesterly brother. yep, I got another STD, bro. Help me out. Like, again, like, again, he's drooling in his seat from drinking too much. Yeah, I mean, yeah. This would probably be, the mid to late 220s, which is maybe why Maekar agreed to marry Daenora to Aerion, because it didn't look good for Daeron fathering a son. He's not very physically capable because he's drunk all the time. And now he's got a pox. Like, he's got some uncurable STD. It doesn't seem like you're going to have kids, especially a son. And the son wouldn't be raised well. It might come out of the womb already infected with this disease. Yeah, not good. So you got to look elsewhere for an heir or an heir's heir. So when Daeron died, that made Aerion the Prince of Dragonstone. But there's no mention that he ever actually lived there, which could have been awkward if he had, because it's like, Aemon's like, I'm the Maester of Dragonstone, but I do not want to be Maester to my brother Aerion. I'll pass on that. So maybe he went back to Summerhall, or maybe Aerion lived at Summerhall, or maybe Aerion lived at court, or maybe Aerion was just never Prince of Dragonstone because it's possible Daeron died much closer to Aerion's death than we are guessing. We're actually guessing that Daeron died a few years before Aerion, but maybe these deaths were close together. What happened was, of course, Aerion drank wildfire and died, and that was only a year before Maekar died. So whether he did this as Prince of Dragonstone or had the title but didn't live there, we really don't know. But maybe Aemon was Maester to Aerion for a brief time. He may have delivered the son that Maekar was hoping one of his sons would have. Baby Maegor. Of course, that wasn't good, that he named his son Maegor. Like, that's not the son I wanted. He's like, yeah, you had a son. I named him Maegor. What?
Can you imagine? Maekar like gets the raven or whatever. I chose like Maegor, and Maegor's like, I should have named this grandchild.
Yeah, like my father named my son. I should be named this son. It's like, dang it, Maegor. What are you doing? He's like, yeah, it kind of sounds like Maekar's father. Like, not really. And again, Maegor's mother was Rhaegal's other daughter with Alyce Arryn, this Daenora Targaryen. So we don't know where Aemon was during this. Aemon may have delivered Maegor, but he may have been back at the Red Keep. And if he was, then he'd be in the presence of Bloodraven often, which is a lot different than being in the presence of Bloodraven the first time around when he was just a boy. Now he's a chained and sworn maester. He's got education. He knows what's up. He can converse with Bloodraven about important topics, about supernatural topics. Maybe Aerys I is still there. There's a lot of potential here for some interesting conversations and relationships that we can only throw out theories about because there's just not much to us here. Aemon mentions to Jon the quote, the feel of a newborn son. Now, that doesn't have to mean it's his son, but it might. So let's talk about what the possibilities are here. The most likely is just close family. We just got through talking about how Aemon delivered his own family's children on at least one occasion, probably, and maybe multiples. And if he lived at court, then his sisters, when they had children with whoever their husbands were, would have brought them to court to present them to the king and the rest of the family. That is extremely standard practice. Unfortunately, we don't know who Rhae and Daella married. Although Daella, a lot of good theories about Daella marrying into Tarth, and then she had a relationship with Dunk, and then that's how the heritage of Duncan the Tall got spread about a bit. But again, that doesn't really have anything to do with Aemon directly. So, good theory to keep in the back of your minds. Anyway.
It has to do with Aemon. I'm just imagining he delivered her baby.
Oh gosh!
And he's like, "This is a big,
large baby." Yeah. But then Egg eventually does have sons. So again, it's of all the children, all these different possibilities. It's the last son of each of these lines that starts having children, and he has a lot. He has Daeron. Yeah, another Daeron, yeah. Although that's the third son. Middle son, Jaehaerys. Firstborn son, Duncan. And then daughters, Shera and Raelle. Not that they're an afterthought, just that we're talking about sons here, because Aemon mentions the feel of a newborn son. And so maybe Aemon is talking about Egg's sons. Maybe Aemon held Duncan, or Jaehaerys, or Daeron, or multiples of them. He could have also held Shera or Raelle. He could have held the girls too, but just, again, for this phrase that he says to Jon, the feel of a newborn son. Benjen talks about the feel of fathering bastards of his own when he's talking to Jon, and Jon's like, never, I won't do that. Now, Benjen didn't father any bastards that we know of, so this phrase doesn't necessarily refer to his own son. But we should consider that. Maybe Aemon actually fathered a bastard. I don't think it's super likely, but it definitely can't be dismissed. And it could relate to that temptation, the vow that he was tempted by to break earlier. If he fathered a son out of wedlock, well, it definitely would have been out of wedlock. If he fathered a son while he was a maester, that might have been the temptation to, like, abandon his chain and be a father. It seems less likely than just having a relationship with a woman and having to decide between her and being a maester. But it could have gone deeper. It could have gone farther down that road, and a child could have come from that. But again, I kind of doubt that, because this is the only vaguest clue we have of it, and it isn't even necessarily pointing to that. It just could. So I don't think so. But Aemon also has memories of Rhae singing to her children. So he was around for that. Maybe this was her presenting her children at court, or him going to visit them wherever they were. But he picked up that nickname, Uncle Maester, from one of her kids, or multiples. That is just so cute. And this is following in the tradition of the little pet names they have for each other. Aemon names Aegon Egg, and in turn he receives the name Uncle Maester from Rhael. And yeah, that's so cool. Rhael is the child of Rhae. Or no, wait, no, Rhael is his other sister. Yeah, right. No, yeah. Rhael is Egg's kid. That's right. Yeah, Rhael is one of Egg's kids. Yes. So many Targaryens,
Just
even I can't keep them all straight.
Time.
Okay. Yeah, that was a nickname given to Aemon by Rhael, one of Egg's daughters. So keeping the tradition alive. So yes, it's the year 232 where Aerion dies drinking wildfire. Did Aerion really seem that mad back in the Hedge Knight? Like a guy that believed wildfire would turn him into a dragon? Like, this is Aerys level. It's almost directly Aerys level madness. And Aerys also didn't start off mad. He got madder as time passed. This seems like the exact same thing. A dude that was kind of off, definitely psychotic / sadist early on. But that sadism and psychopathology doesn't lead to insanity. Doesn't make you think you're gonna turn into a dragon.
Do you think that, like, I could see if Daeron, like, told him about his dreams and was like, if his brothers hated him, that they could have, like, given him information that influenced him to do that.
That's possible. My favorite theory is that Bloodraven conned him into this.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So to get rid of him.
It could be a multiple pronged thing. It could be like Bloodraven was like, Daeron, tell him about this dream where he drinks wildfire, and he will drink the wildfire.
Get him to believe this, and he'll do it, and then that'll remove him, and it'll look like this insane person killed himself, and no one would possibly would pin it on someone else, because it doesn't look like a murder. So
that would be like a level of insanity, but it would be like being manipulated is more of that, right? Yeah. Like being tricked. Being tricked, like, yes. Yeah, if he earnestly thought that because everyone around him was tricking him into believing that it was possible, well, then there you go.
And there would be a good reason to do this, which is to keep him from inheriting. Like, you do not want this guy inheriting the throne. It's very straightforward to stop this guy from getting the Iron Throne. And it's not very well known about Aerion, but Aerion supposedly dabbled in sorcery and the black arts. We have no specifics, but that would explain why he was open to this.
That was his explanation for why he just liked to cut people up.
Yeah, he's like, I'm trying
to do sorcery. I'm sorcery, man. Sorcery.
So yeah, what could Aemon have known about him? Like, what Aemon understands his belief in the supernatural, and maybe Aemon... I don't think Aemon would participate in a plot to con his own brother into killing himself, but they might have gotten information from Aemon to use against Aerion. You know, like, tell us about your brother, and not telling him what it's about. I don't know that would be necessary, but the ins and outs of this are very interesting, and Aemon's personal feelings on his brother are also very interesting and intriguing. The possibilities there are pretty endless, especially given what we said earlier, that with Dornish Dane pointing out that Aerion wasn't mentioned when Aemon is remembering his brothers and hoping to see them in the afterlife. It's like, well, I don't want to see that one. Okay. The death of Maekar, the Great Council in 233. The Peak Uprising occurred in 233. It's an event we discuss in detail in an episode of the same name. The Peak Rebellion, Peak Uprising, and the death of Maekar. And it makes sense why the lords of the Great Council would look at Aemon. Even though he's a maester, he's an adult male Targaryen, he's dutiful, he's not Egg, and they didn't like Egg because he was so pro-commoner. He hung out with a hedge knight. They didn't like him. And when he became king, he would prove why they didn't like him, because he would be very pro-commoner. They were right. They were right to not to like him. Even though we all like him, we all like Egg, you can understand why the lords did not want him to be king. So this is almost certainly the test that Aemon was referring to in the fullness of his manhood. Because, yeah, he's 35 years old. That's definitely an adult. I mean, by Westerosi standards, he's an adult much younger than this, but there's no doubt by 35. Yes, the maesterly vows, but you can get around that. The royal authority supersedes these vows. Royal authority can overcome anything, really. You can overcome bastardy. You can say, nope, you're not a bastard. You can do that. You can get someone out of their vows. You can get someone out of the Kingsguard. Rob says there's more precedent for releasing people from the Night's Watch vows than, well, I forget the counterexample, but there's precedent for it. So it would make sense. He would have to go against a lot, though. The maesterly vow comes with a vow of service, yes, but also remaining childless and unmarried and without title and landless. So he's violating multiple tenets of the maesterly oath there. But again, the needs of the realm, lords and ladies wanting what they want out of a king, they'd push through all that. They'd be like, yeah, so what? We want what we want. We don't care about his vows. Like, it's a chicken feed in the scheme of things to them. But to Aemon, it's not. To Aemon, it's everything. Those vows are very serious to him. Again, this is a man who grew up in the shadow of Daeron the Good, someone who takes these things very seriously, takes his dedication to the realm, his duty to the realm very seriously. And even though his father was dutiful about different things, his father was an honorable, dutiful man. But it was still very tempting. Like, how could it not be? Supreme executive power, luxury, glory, homage, everyone serving him, his power at his fingertips. Even a guy like him, it's hard to turn that down. But because he's a guy like him, he did. He was able to do it. The temptation was probably very hard to refuse. I mean, it's one of his 3 great temptations. He mentions it. One of the 3 greatest struggles of his life. But he did it. And it's another extreme parallel to Jon himself. That's why Aemon is just such a perfect man for those scenes. Jon was tempted, offered a crown and a title by Stannis. He's like, all you got to do is burn the tree and all this other stuff, and you will be Jon Stark, Lord of Winterfell. No more Jon Snow on the wall. Super fantastic parallel. Both of them concerned about their other members of their family as part of the decision. Both of them did not think only about themselves. Both of them thought well beyond themselves. How would it affect the realm? How would it affect themselves too, though? Yes, as men of honor. How would it affect Jon to do the wrong thing? He wouldn't be able to live with himself, even though it might be a great choice for him in terms of his own personal advancement. You know, he'd live a great life that way. He could marry Val, like this extremely attractive woman. He could have children that he never thought he would have, and they would be true-born children, something that he also never thought about having. A door that was never open to him. Same thing for Aemon. You could have children. You swore to not have children. You grew up thinking this was going to be your lot in life. But no, actually, here's an opportunity to throw all that away and actually be the king. But it's not what he wanted. He didn't think it was right. His duty came first, and that makes him one of the rarest types of individuals, someone that actually chose duty over supreme executive power, over the top spot, over the thing that almost anyone would not have, a choice that almost anyone else would not have made. Most people would have failed to contain their greed, their lust, their desire for power. Something that lurks within all of us to a certain degree. But we're not going to face this choice, though. So it's hard for us to imagine that. But put yourself in that position anyway, even though it's pretty hard to imagine. A man that's just dedicated to duty. And even for him, it was this tempting. It just goes to show you the nature of power and how corrupting it can be and how tempting it can be. Even when you've dedicated your life to not having it, the choice is still tempting. So Aegon was chosen by the council to be Aegon V. Aemon, his concern grew beyond that. He's like, hey, they offered me the throne and they offered it to me in secret. It was offered on the sly. It wasn't a great public declaration. Will Aemon be our next king? No, it was like, hey, shh, don't tell, but what do you think about being king? You know, it was underhanded. So if he thinks they're willing to offer it on the sly, what else might they do? Because he knows their motivation. He knows they don't want his brother on the throne. He's probably figured that out. He understands it. It's kind of straightforward, and I doubt they'd be able to keep their opinions to themselves. These lords aren't known for their keeping their tongues to themselves, right? they tend to speak their minds, and so he would know. He would see the writing on the wall. He's like, yeah, they don't like my brother as king, and they might try to use me against him, even without my interest. I don't want to be used against him, but that doesn't mean they can't do it. That doesn't mean they can't enforceably install him as the king and overthrow his brother and kill him. He doesn't want that outcome. He doesn't want that even to be an option. If they are going to overlook his maester's vows, then it's not safe. He has to take another step. He can't just say, I will never be king. That's not enough. So he has to take another step, which is take the black. It's a remarkable act of duty and sacrifice. And interestingly, though love is the death of duty, that is a major theme in A Song of Ice and Fire, and he's the tip of that spear, introducing that concept, love being the death of duty. It may have been love, in part, that made him do his duty here. Yes, he was doing a duty to the realm and his family and to himself by keeping his own honor and being an example of honor to others. He loved his brother. He loved Egg, and he wouldn't want to be used against him, even if it wasn't by his own design, which of course it wouldn't be by his own design, but he doesn't want to even take that. Just as he doesn't want to take even the smallest amount of chance for civil war to happen. A lesson he learned from Daron. Be proactive there. He doesn't want to take even the slightest chance to be a threat to his brother. So he takes the black. Again, super similar to Jon being offered Winterfell, even after he had taken the black. And by that token, we can wonder if even Aemon thought that was enough. He's like, okay, 2 different vows to not have kids and to serve. Maesterly vows, Night's Watch vows. Is that even enough? Are they still going to try and use me? Well, the proximity argument is pretty big. He's going all the way to the wall and hopes to be forgotten, which he was eventually kind of forgotten. A few people still remembered. Stannis, Jon figured it out eventually. Jorah Mormont, or G.R. Mormont knew, because he was an older man too that knew who Aemon was from before. But yeah, it's he would have been concerned that, hey, if they can overlook one vow, they can probably overlook 2. So I also need to put distance between myself and my brother, and I also need to just keep a low profile. Maybe people will forget about me. And yeah, and that kind of did work to a certain degree and over time. And he was going kind of famously to the wall, because when he went to the wall, so did Bloodraven and many of the Raven's Teeth, and it's not exactly the way to be incognito, to be like sent off with one of the most famous members of the realm like ever. But maybe that would, at the same time, maybe that would help him stay a little hidden. It's like, well, the spotlight's on Bloodraven. Maybe he can kind of go unnoticed in his shadow. So he's 35 years old, and he would live in another 67, though he had already faced 2 of his greatest tests. Obviously, life on the wall is not easy, and he did his duty for all that time. But before that, before he actually went to the wall, the last thing Aemon said before taking the black is something we have, and it's a pretty perfect way to wrap up our episode. Quote,
"Allow me to give my lord one last piece of counsel," the old man had said. "The same counsel that I once gave my brother when we parted for the last time. He was 33 when the great council chose him to mount the Iron Throne. A man grown with sons of his own, yet in some ways still a boy. Egg had an innocence to him, a sweetness we all loved. Kill the boy within you, I told him the day I took ship for the wall. It takes a man to rule, an Aegon, not an egg. Kill the boy and let the man be born." The old man felt Jon's face. You are half the age that Egg was, and your own burden is a crueler one, I fear. You will have little joy of your command, but I think you have the strength in you to do the things that must be done. Kill the boy, Jon Snow. Winter is almost upon us. Kill the boy and let the man be born.
Doesn't this guy just have the most memorable quotes? I swear. This character is a literal literary achievement. He's just amazing. And now Egg probably looked up to Aemon in a lot of ways. It's a pretty big deal to hear your brother, the man who nicknamed you Egg, tell you that you can't be Egg anymore. Like, I named you Egg, but now you must kill that person and become a man, become Aegon. It's also works pretty well metaphorically. An egg can't handle all that weight, that burden. Eggs are fragile. Aegons, as well as Aejons, Jon Snow's in this case, are stronger. Yes, got to kill that boy. I wonder what happened to his dragon egg. I guess he left it behind. He didn't bring it with him to the wall. Yeah. And it probably, sadly, was destroyed with the others at Summerhall. Our trivia question. What animal did Aemon name? A mule that he named Maester, that he gave to Duncan Egg. How about that? Pretty cool. I mentioned quite a few episodes in this one that are connected rabbit holes. The Peak Rebellion and Death of Maekar. Bloodraven. We got several episodes on Bloodraven. Daron II is part of the Blackfyre Rebellion series. Of course, the actual Blackfyre Rebellion series as a whole, but in particular, we mentioned the Red Grass Field and the End of Daemon. But that series features episodes on Bittersteel, Daemon, Aegon IV, as well as Bloodraven and the Red Grass Field. And of course, our Dunk and Egg series. There's lots of mentions of Aemon in those. And of course, we talk about Dunk and Egg so much here. That might be what inspires you to delve further into them, especially with the TV show not too long on the horizon, whenever that might be. All right, folks, we'll be back with another episode next week. And all throughout the rest of the year, we have very few weeks off. We will have a few, but we'll also have some scripted episodes. So it won't be a live stream every week, but there will be an episode almost every week. I think only 4 or 5 weeks the rest of the year we won't have an episode. So pretty great. Lots to come. Lots more to happen. Thanks to Nina for her great notes. Thanks to Joey and Jesse for the intro, outro music that we use in our book-only episodes. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for the maps you see behind us. Check out claridox.de to buy his maps or to buy the files that you can go print on your own. That's
this was the return of his intro, too.
Oh, the return of Michael's intro. That's right. We used Bran the Builder's intro for our show coverage and Michael Klarfeld's intro for our book coverage. So, yeah, thanks to him for that as well. We have many things to thank Michael for. But once again, his website, KLARADOX.de. And ours is historywesteros.com, where you can find a lot of different ways to support us or get involved in our additional content or just find any episode you want. You can use our episode searcher. That's very useful. Either way, you know what to do. Until next time, Valar, reread us.